All right, it's getting the meeting going live.
Perfect. Meeting is now streaming. All right. If you are trying to join the meeting, we had a little bit of the fun Zoom dance going on. So I'm going to go ahead and read out the meeting name, number and the password. So if you'd like to join, the meeting ID is 864-2298-5255. 864-2298-5255. And my invite says there's a password required. So if you need to enter it, it is 641394. 641394.
And I should say, if you're looking, sorry to interrupt, if you're looking at the Agenda Center, the Zoom link on the public hearing is correct. There is a typo in the Zoom link in the packet. So go to the Zoom link in the public hearing, and that will bring you into the right meeting. Thank you, Emily, for your help getting this.
Thank you, Abby. So we're all getting comfortable in our year of pandemic. This is keeping us hot on our feet. All good. Okay. Let's see here. So I see Garish, Josie, Makeda, Steve, Rick, OB, is that you called in? Okay. So Bob hasn't joined yet. We'll wait for him to join. I am going to go ahead and call us to order since we are at a quorum at 4:09. And we will start with citizens to be heard. Now, we do have a public hearing on the agenda. So if you are here to speak about the public hearing agenda item, please hold your comments until the public hearing. So this is anything that's not a public hearing, and we will have another one of these in the 5-ish block as well. So if you're not able to join now or having issues, you can speak then. If you would like to speak now, go ahead and put your comment in the chat, and that way we'll know to welcome you up to speak. Okay. I am not seeing anyone in the chat. Is there anyone who's trying to speak that's unable to chat that needs to come off of mute? All right, so we will move ahead to ex parte communications and disclosures. Do any commissioners have any disclosures to make about any agenda items today? All right, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the meeting minutes from March 8th. Are there any comments or revisions to the meeting minutes? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay, motion by Garish and seconded by Steve. Did I see that correctly?
Yes, yes, I second.
All right, any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes from March 8th, raise your hand or say aye. That looks like 6 of 6 in attendance with Bob not yet logged on. Wonderful. Okay, so now we will move on to our public hearing. The way we'll run this, since it's
sorry, Emily, before we have the public hearing, we do have the county attorney was unable to be here right at 4, and the public hearing I think will really benefit from her input. So I wanted to propose switching the order so that we first discuss the discussion item of the Spanish Valley survey and then open the public hearing, just so that the county attorney can participate. And I think that will also give anyone who might have gotten sent into the wrong link the chance to get caught up.
I think that's a great idea, except OB was going to lead that discussion item and he's not on yet. So if somebody wants to move, we do need a motion to change our agenda around. So if somebody wants to move that we bring the county commission update and county commission action report items above the public hearing, we can accept that. So moved by Garish.
Actually, Emily, I thought we had agreed months ago that we would hold public hearings starting after 5 o'clock or at 5 o'clock. Have we changed our policy on that?
We had that policy when we were in person. Since we've been using Zoom and remote hearings, we have not been following that. So that's not
Or what?
specifically stated in our agenda or bylaws.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to why. It seemed like it was working pretty well to give people an opportunity to get off work and whatnot, to start hearings at 5 o'clock, and they could be sure that they would know what time hearings would start.
Mhm. No, I think that's great feedback. I think for now with OB here, we can move on to that discussion item. And if it's still not 5, we can entertain a motion as well to move the county commission items. I mean, at any time you can move to amend the agenda, but we do need a motion. And then we can take that into consideration, whether we just delay the start of our meetings till 5 while we have a lighter agenda. I recommend we bring that up in future discussions.
Okay. And the agenda also has next up the disclosures. And I don't know if you covered that.
I did ask if there are any disclosures. Did you have any disclosures to disclose?
No, I did not.
All right. So
Thank
covered that one twice. So here's what we'll do. So we will need a motion to amend our agenda, and with your consideration, Garrett, because I don't think this discussion item will take 45 minutes. If somebody wants to move to table the public hearing until after the action items report, that might be the right way of approaching this.
I so move. We tabled the public hearing until after the action item report.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, seconded by Makeda. Makeda, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay. OB, welcome. So Bob is running point on this sort of ongoing question of surveying the county around looking into county interest related to development in Spanish Valley, current, existing, proposed, as well as helping to inform us as we look to sculpt a small area plan in the future for that 191 area, and maybe also Spanish Valley Drive in that southern 191 sort of latitude. So while it's going to be some time until we have planning staff in place to go forward into great depths of that process, this is something that we can move forward as a body, and it's something that Commissioner Hedin also mentions interest in us exploring. So OB, I know there's a bit of this you want to explore both on talking through your thinking and then also just making sure that this survey is going ahead. Can I turn things over to you? Now you're muted.
I'm going to try to do a share screen. Let me see if this works, and otherwise maybe Emily will share this. Host enabled participant screen sharing. This is the
Abby?
message I get.
So we'll need Abby to give permission.
Yep, I'll do that right now.
Great. Let's see.
Sorry, Emily, can you tell me? Oh wait, never mind. Thanks. Sorry for all the technical issues.
You're fine. It's all good.
We actually made it.
Abby, if you want to make me a okay. So I think now, Abby, you should be able to.
I think I can do it.
Yeah.
Now let's just see right there. Oh, that actually seems to have worked. And so I'll only say this. Here, all I did was really combine some questions we had before, some that I got from Trish. I have subtracted a few and added a couple and just tried to make them better worded. I actually, going through this, I have changes I'd like to make myself, and I think we are probably a ways away from having a final questionnaire, but I would greatly appreciate more eyes on this, and whatever we get out of this today, I think then we can all take away and look at. We'll of course give you a new copy of it, take away and look at it and think about questions that need to be added. And I noticed in a couple of places there's more than one answer and whether I should put that kind of explicitly down. So I think what we're going to do is just go right from the top here. Question 1, which really was on the kind of original questionnaire survey that we had. Question 2, which is just to say, where's your location? So I'm just going to go down and see if people have comments they want to make. So does question 1 look like a reasonable question to kind of figure out where people are in general, and maybe how we'll break out the questions and answers in the survey later on?
Yeah, Bob, I think that's great. Instead of asking people for their address, to get a general idea as to where they're from
Great.
within Grand County or San Juan County is a good approach.
And I do have this second question, Garish, which is, what is your neighborhood or general location, which if they want to put down can give us something kind of finer than that. Does that seem okay to people?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see the relevance so much, but it's okay with me.
Yeah, and the only relevance would be, I live on 191 or some special place in Spanish Valley might be helpful. What types of uses would you like to see on the 191 commercial corridor?
Bob, when we did this for the northern 313, 191 area, we had given some examples and then had a category of other. And given the existing zones along this, that we have highway commercial, we have general business in small numbers, we have range and grazing, like that sort of runs the gamut. We might want to look at the use tables and see if there are specific uses that we are concerned as a body that we've heard from citizen comment that there might need to be more of or less than in this area, and call those out. Because ultimately I'd love to go into the planning process with the sense of, oh, we're really hearing from the public that they want to see more retail space, or they'd really like to see this be more residential. And then that could help us make better decisions as we start to hone a draft.
And so if I'm understanding, that's basically a small list of 3 or 4 things that go on there, and then some thing that says other. It certainly makes it easier to code the responses too.
Yeah, and I think we had something like 12 different options, and you could select as many as you wanted. And what it gave us is a very interesting table or display to say, well, some people wanted this and some people wanted that, but there was a major gap between these preferred uses and everything else. And so it allowed us to look at informed comparisons in addition to answer questions we had as a body about specific uses.
Sounds like a good idea to me.
I have a slight comment on that, because if I remember from the small area plan survey, I feel like with some of the lists, survey takers kind of interpreted it as things that were being pushed for that area, like it was a little bit loaded. And what I like in a lot of this survey is sort of like, here's the information about what currently exists, or like defining things, and then maybe leaving an answer a little bit more open-ended. So my only kind of amendment to that is maybe like link to the use table, or sort of like present what is currently allowed rather than like a list of possibilities, and still leave kind of an open-ended answer, if that makes sense.
I was going to make a similar comment, Josie. I think that's spot on.
Got it. And of course, the nice thing is I can go to the YouTube and get these comments all over again. Good. What would you like to see in Spanish Valley outside the commercial corridors? Am I going to get similar comments probably?
I think it would be really interesting I mean, some we can make assumptions about what will and won't show up in either category, but I'd be interested to see how absolute those were. And then others might surprise us.
Yeah, I feel differently about these kind of broader categorizations than like specific uses.
So this one we might leave relatively open-ended for now.
Could
The
I
nice thing is
recommend that we look at the uses that we spelled out in our first survey? We can either pull those up now, or maybe Bob, you could go through and make some suggestions for which to call out. But I remember those being, they weren't hyper specific. They weren't line items from the use table. They were like, guide services, educational centers, single family residential. I don't have it in front of me, but I recall it being a pretty solid list that could apply generally countywide.
What I'll try to do, I'll go and look at that. Maybe the next time we do this, I'll come back with the ones that we thought should be changed rather than the ones we didn't think. And of course, eventually we'll go over everything to decide whether we like the survey.
And,
Okay,
I think, I'm thinking that we could, without getting too explicit, give some examples. And I'm thinking curb, gutter, sidewalks in residential areas, neighborhood commercial areas or retail areas, schools, public parks. Just give some general ideas as to what as a tickler list, and that wouldn't be a total list, but just throw out some ideas, say multifamily, apartment houses, higher density, lower density, low density, keep the density the same. Just throw out some ideas so that people are thinking about what vision they would have for their neighborhood.
I have a question, since I'm pretty fresh to the commission. Are we, when these surveys are done, like you were saying you did one for the north side of town, is it generally one and done, or is it like start with a really broad open-ended question survey like this and then gradually send out a couple surveys that get more detailed or specific?
It was one and done for the north end, if you will, north entrance.
There's a trade-off between being comprehensive and then the cost. So when we did the one on the north, for example, every resident in Greene County was actually sent a small card placard with the address for the survey, and they were informed of it. And that was it was worth it to be able to make insightful decisions at a county, but I would question whether we could do that out of planning budget for every opportunity like this, or certainly to justify multiple surveys. So I personally, coming from a research and development background, I value surveys. I think that, when they're just running and going, they're extremely useful. But we'll probably want this to be as comprehensive, but not a barrier to completion as possible, versus doing multiple of them. And then that's what the public hearing process is for. We draft any planning documents over the course of several months, and there's ample opportunities for the community to submit letters, to attend public hearings, to speak as citizens, to be heard. So that's also an opportunity to hone in comment.
Yeah, the way I see this, McKenna, is the county is due for a revision of our general plan, and it is quite involved. It would be quite involved and quite expensive to pull off, like with big meetings at the Grand Center, blah, blah, blah. So in lieu of a revision of the general plan, we're tackling it with these smaller area plans. And this area is certainly larger than the 313 intersection plan that we developed, but it's like less intensive and less expensive than a general plan would be. So it's just a way of getting kind of a pull from the citizens as
No,
to
that's okay, I'll do it.
what they would like to see without going through a very involved public involvement process.
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious for my purposes in like reviewing this and knowing how I should be interpreting if I feel like it needs to be more specific or stuff like that. So thank you for the explanation. Appreciate it.
Okay, I think I have enough input probably on that. I think we're down to question 5. If you support seeing some commercial development in Spanish Valley outside of the Highway 191 corridor, what kinds of commercial development would you like to see?
Just a comment on this, and I think this really dovetails off of what Josie was saying. I think for questions 3, 4, and 5, if we can have, a side by side with a map of those zones, what is already zoned for, say highway commercial, and just kind of keep it fairly high level still, but that way folks can see, where this, commercial development would already be beholden to. Yeah.
And it brings up, of course, a great question where we haven't really defined Spanish Valley yet, or the extent of 191 that we are considering. I mean, I assume from the, probably from the border with San Juan County, but then where does it end as we go north? So a map would in some ways be very helpful.
I think
And
we
that
should send
takes
a map
time.
out with this. The two sort of clearest borders are probably the Spanish Trail, where the gas station is south of town, or Mill Creek area south of the university, since that's where we know the city has plans to annex in some large portion of that land. I think Spanish Valley exists in the heart where you want it to be, depending on who you're talking to. But those are probably the clearest roadmaps that provide a division across the valley.
Any other input on that particular comment? And Emily, then that's probably something we probably work with staff to get a reasonable looking map for those areas.
Yeah, we can pull a map. I think we as a body should decide where we think those boundaries are. I mean, for the sake of this survey, we had sort of a moving boundary, again, the most recent small area plan, where originally we had included the airport area on our initial map when we first sent out the survey, and then adjusted it down. So I don't know how urgently critical that is as far as to get good data, but if there's a strong opinion one way or another, maybe we could, Bob, do a quick straw poll just to kind of get a sense for it, and then move forward with that as the default until we have reason otherwise. Again, not to suggest that people who don't live in that area or don't have interest in that area wouldn't have a valuable voice to gain, but it could help people frame in their mind what they're thinking.
I mean, my sense for the northern border is always kind of up to the city line. However, that zigs and zags, which it definitely does. And I think we've already kind of determined that Spanish Valley writ large is really large and diverse. And so that's a really good reason for all of the questions that kind of pare down to like neighborhoods and nodes and things like that. But I think if we go any further south than the city line, then we have like a nebulous in between zone that I don't know what I would call that.
Good. That may be as far as we go with that at this point. And good comment about 3, 4, and 5 being certainly a bit together in terms of questions, in terms of grouping. Question 6: if you support seeing some commercial development in Spanish Valley, where in Spanish? Oops, that's also probably pretty similar question. Do we leave those as just open-ended? Probably so. Both of those two questions, I guess, 5 and 6.
Bob, I think they're asking different questions. One is what types of development, and the
Okay,
second one is the location. So I think
yes,
I think they're okay.
they're okay. Yeah, I
That's
wasn't
why
thinking they were the same question, just the same in terms of being open-ended.
I would just be mindful that open-ended questions are harder. They're less accurate to parse. They take more time to parse, but they also might take more time to fill out. Whereas multiple choice questions with an option for an open answer make it easier for people to roll through, and ultimately volume of data is what we're going through. So I think, except for in very specific cases, we should have selections for people to choose from, because we have heard a lot of input from the public on this already, to just kind of set some defaults, providing for people to be able to give us their voice. Because ultimately we want this to be actionable, not just expressive.
Mhm.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. I was gonna say that I feel like 5 and even 6 could be multiple choice for sure. That
And
seems
I
like
think 5 and 6 are linked in that we would want to see types linked with locations, because maybe people think this type should be in this location, but this type shouldn't, it should be in this other location. So rather than
yeah,
getting a bunch of answers that aren't connected.
maybe even switched on the survey in order. Where and then what?
And like what in those areas.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I do agree with Emily, just kind of taking away from the small area plan survey. I wanted people to fill out the vision question a lot more, but most often they didn't. Because I think they just didn't, want to. And so, and I know it was very helpful to be able to like put all of the answers basically into just charts and see very clearly patterns. So that is fair.
I'm also, I'd say, Josie, I'm also probably a fan of when you have multiple choice questions, unless they are, of course, strongly agree to strongly disagree, Likert type items. I'm much a fan of having another category.
Yeah.
The people can put down something that they really wanted to be able to answer outside of circling a list that we put together. So okay.
Hey,
Oops.
Bob, quick question. I also think that part of this process, and we don't have to do this on this meeting particularly, but we're already up to near 30 questions,
Yep.
which just, again, I survey a lot of folks, and people don't like filling out surveys once they get past about 10 or 12 questions. So we might want to be very diligent about consolidating questions, especially if we leave space for open comment at the end.
Yep.
I would err towards less is more, and then we can always add in after the first few responses if we're feeling like we're not getting the information that we seek.
And I have to say, as I eliminated 2 or 3 questions, I didn't want to do all the elimination. That is, there may be questions here that are, people think are very valuable. So you should certainly tell me if you think there's a question here that's not terribly valuable. There's 2 questions on bed and breakfast. I
Yeah.
bet you they could be consolidated into one. And of course, as we don't get through this process in 45 minutes or whatever we have, that's also okay, because I'm getting a sense and feel for what people would like to do in terms of having multiple answers versus blank spaces here. So it's slowly going into the head here. Okay, I'm moving. Where would did I do 7? It's always.
You're up to the PUD question.
What's that? Whoops. Say
Oh,
that
no,
again.
nope, I'm wrong. Sorry. I believe you're on
7.
7. Yeah, commercial nodes.
7. Yes. Where do you see existing commercial nodes in Spanish Valley? Would you like to see these further developed? Are there areas you think it would be appropriate for new or expanded commercial development?
It does seem that 6 and 7 could be combined to me.
Okay, I'm jotting down these suggestions. That's great. Okay, and this is a very diffuse question. These are about what kind of development would you like to see, but you got to tell me if you want something eliminated. What does rural character mean to you? It may just be too diffuse. I think it is.
We also have a couple more questions about rural character later on too that we could kind of sneak
That's
something
true.
of that element into.
Yeah. Gonna let me
I-
drop it?
I would drop it. I mean, this is one where if the purpose of this is to help us make decisions around planning, this is valuable, but it isn't, or this is useful, but it's not valuable to actually helping me make those decisions.
Yes. I would say
Yeah.
in general, I left everything in that had been on the original list and the questions that Trish suggested, and added a couple where I thought we didn't have stuff. This is a nice long question. I won't read the whole thing, but it does a nice job of describing what a planned unit development is, and then asks a series of questions about it. And I think this is one of those that I looked at and said, well, you know, you could answer more than one of these circling, and you can do one of two things. You can say you can circle more than one answer, or you can eliminate an answer or two and get down to one where you probably can only circle one of the answers. I don't know what people prefer. For instance, I think you could say you support the use of PUD tools in Spanish Valley, and you support, nope, not in all parts. I think maybe it was in some parts, but not in my neighborhood. I think you could answer both of those, and that might be interesting information to have, at which point you put something in parentheses that says you can circle more than one. What do people think here?
So would it be helpful to put an example in there of what is a planned unit development and what is not on the map so that people can say, okay, I get that one.
And I guess, and you guys can, I guess I still struggle with the whole planned unit development thing in the sense that it's, you know, stating to me this question is a little, you know, to preserve agricultural land. But for example, that's not what happened where I live. That wasn't agricultural land. So I think as long as we're making that really clear, like maybe agricultural land / open space, so that people truly know, because I don't think the way that this is phrased is getting to the gist of it. That's my opinion. If it's agricultural land / open space, I'm fine with that. But
And I might say something like undeveloped space, because we've had in previous meetings, open space is like a term.
yeah, that sounds great, Josie. Yeah.
Josie, was that I was writing notes. Did you say undeveloped land?
I think, yeah, something to that nature. Mhm.
Yeah, I just feel using ag land is slightly misleading, maybe, but
Well, yeah, and it
I
could also be like native, grasses and shrubs or things like that. I do agree that there's a lot of different ways this is applied.
Can I go back very quickly to, do we really, and this is terrible because I think a map would be very interesting in answering this question. On the other hand, do we have space or time? I don't mean time for putting a map into this, but as the person answers the questionnaire, a map where PUDs are. And of course, I guess you can have new planned PUDs in new places.
Does anyone feel comfortable sharing if they were the author of this question and what their intent was behind it? What information we are seeking that giving this question would help us respond to?
Yes. So Emily, I was the one that authored that question, and I was wanting to, I know that there has been a lot of public comment and a lot of that the PUD tool has been something that has really generated a lot of public input. And so I felt like it was appropriate to have a question in there that explained what it was, explained why we have that tool, and asked for people's opinions on it. I think that some people who are objecting to the PUD have a bit of a misunderstanding of what the tool is and intended for. I think a lot of people who are objecting understand it and are objecting, to it on the merit. But I thought it would be helpful to include, and it sounds like this is helpful feedback too, because it sounds like the definition, the way I described it in there, can definitely be refined. That link in there links to the actual part of the land use code where the PUD is, the code language is. And so that was my intention with that, was to use this as an opportunity to get the actual wording of the PUD option into people's, to make that available to people, and then see if, given a little more information about what the PUD tool is, then do you think it's appropriate, yes or no, in different areas? And so I think this question, any of the questions I put in, can absolutely be edited, refined. But I think including something that is specific about the PUD would be helpful.
I think so too. I think it's great to have this question in here. Just maybe just manipulate it just a little bit.
And this is I probably would not put a map in with where the PUD units are. The interesting thing is where they'll probably go is where you have a reasonably large lot, and either it'd be difficult to develop all of it, or you actually do want to put them in small places so you have some open space. And of course, it does create conflict, but that's what this question is about, when you put the density over on one side and it's near neighbors. We're probably where we get some reaction to it.
So I wonder, just looking through the questions that we have in this draft, the first bit are sort of, what sort of uses might you want to see open-ended? Then do you support increased commercial development? If so, where? If so, what kind? Do you support any increased density in the valley related to increasing housing availability and potentially affordability? If so, where? If so, using what tools? If not, why? So I say, not that it needs to be that simplified, but that's kind of the framing I'm seeing. And if we can break this down to 3 or 4 questions per each of these big ones, then we have some questions related to just sort of more general, like the B&Bs and the ADUs, and looking at that. That might be where the PUD comes in, of just what alternate tools are you open to the county exploring to address housing, commercial, and other uses in Spanish Valley. And then there's some of these that I don't know that I agree that all of them need to be in here, but some outliers. That's kind of the framing that I see starting to emerge from this. And I think that could be really easy for people to identify with as they're reading through it and see a narrative, and then just kind of clean up the structure. I'm not finding the words, but yeah.
I'm going to leave that question. The high density housing overlay, sunset clause, anyway, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Really the question of whether you want to have more HDHO, and I interpreted this as in extending the HDHO, not just the 20 units that were to be built where they should be put. So I put extending the HDHO units. Yes, I don't know about these answers. Maybe, because the maybe then as kind of a classification here, we should see how the first round of units works. I guess you could have maybe for other reasons, and therefore there's a no and an other in there.
that was a question I put in there as well, Bob, and I think your interpretation is spot on. That sunset clause, we're unlikely to see any big projects go in the next 3 months. And so this, I think, would help guide the county commission in deciding whether or not the HDHO should be extended or not.
Maybe
Is-
altering the responses to yes, no, other, and then the other would serve as the maybe. And people could define why.
I don't know. I kind of honestly like that. Maybe with the contextualized answer on there.
Any other opinions?
All right.
I'm
Is
not
this,
tied to it. I think we can move on.
just out of curiosity, like this is the first we've seen that's, I mean, even the PUD one generally, but this is the first one that doesn't mention Spanish Valley. Is this asking about yes in Spanish Valley? Like, because that's where this one feels like it's a useful question, but I don't know if the survey is the where it belongs, if we were to start using our knife a bit on some of these.
It'd be certainly easy to put Spanish Valley in there. I was interested in this question, but and you may be right, Emily. The question is, of course, will we do very few surveys, and if Spanish Valley residents thought that this was something they wanted to see, this might be an indication to the council. So it's so interesting.
Strong opinions weekly held is my forte. I do think clarifying though, like I do think we want people.
It should have something in there about Spanish Valley for sure. Okay, I'll work on that question. This is terrible, but I don't know much about this issue. And so when I saw this question, I did highlight it just like it sits here. And it did actually say I didn't put this in, needs to include information on Spanish Valley Parkway, but I wasn't sure how this should be changed. And maybe whoever wrote the question might be able to phrase it somehow, if they still want it.
I'm sorry, Bob, that was something I put in as notes. I should have just taken that out. I put that in as a note to myself and then wasn't able to follow up on it. So I think that question is one we can remove.
We've dropped 2 now.
Yeah.
Good job.
Because there are questions about bikeability and walkability in neighborhoods. And so maybe that's more what we're trying to get at with this question as well,
Good.
and kind of consolidating those all into one direction.
I think Josie is right on what at least my intention was with that note.
And I look at time here. I'm not very worried about time. Emily, you tell us when we have to move off of this, and I'll move off of it, but I'm going to go and tell you, the timekeeper tells us what we're supposed to do here. And again, the comments that I'm getting are going to be very helpful in getting to other questions.
I think the next few questions till the bottom of this page all kind of relate to each other, and then maybe we hit pause and take up the second half next time or over email.
Okay. And email is a great way to do this too. Are there trails or public access points in your neighborhood that are important to you? And if so, which ones? This seems like an ideal thing to have a blank space. Seems important. We moving on. 13, what type of transportation development would you like to see in Spanish Valley? Very open.
I feel like all 3 of these could be either combined into the same question, or at least have multiple choice options with another category.
When you say all 3 of these, Josie, do you mean 13, 14, and 15?
Yes, my apologies. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I might have more trouble formulating 13. Certainly the bikeable and walkable could absolutely be have multiple answers. And I guess about probably 13 if you have another. If somebody may want to help me on that with suggestions for 13, I would say.
Well, I assume you're asking about like bus, bike, carpool, like that kind of transportation options. So you could just list like bike, bus stops, a bus route, or, a bike path, or you could just list all the obvious options. And then, like you said, have another category on there. Cause there's only, I feel like, a handful of obvious transportation options that would apply to this area.
Yeah, I think a list would be good for that question.
Okay.
For 14 and 15 and even other similar questions, we also, I mean, there's ways we can format the question to say, I consider my neighborhood to be walkable, not at all.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of these also, and I just hadn't really thought about this until we're going through it, is it's useful to know how important this is to people as well. And so I wonder if there's a formative question like, how important is it to you that your neighbor is ... and do you consider your neighborhood to be ...
I feel like that's a really good idea.
Has there been a recent transportation survey? I seem to remember there has been one. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And if there hasn't been one, or if there has been one, maybe we're double working and we could leave some of this stuff off in the effort of shortening the survey.
Was that just with the city? Was that just a city led?
Yeah, I think it was with the Spanish Valley Parkway. That was one option of, I think, 3 to use specific monies for transportation development in Grand County. So I think it was that survey specific to that money.
And is the parkway, is that different than the Spanish Valley pathway? That's the pedestrian route?
I think it's the same thing.
Oh, okay, maybe. I'm sorry, I just
It's
introduced.
like a multi-use pathway.
extension.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm still getting caught up on a lot of the things in this, the specifics of this department, but I can definitely look into that specific, what's been done on transportation surveys and get that information out to everyone by email.
That's great, Abby. That's actually what I immediately thought, oh, if a survey's been done by the county, we'll just ask Abby to find it. Great.
I'll find it. I'll give everyone an update of what's been done in that regard recently.
Well, I recommend we pause here. Garish, go ahead. And then
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't think that this would be a trail planning tool, but I think getting a better idea from people in Spanish Valley as to what's existing trails are important to them would be very helpful. There are some trails out in, or some ambulatory use areas, linear use areas in Spanish Valley that don't show up on the county trails plan. And therefore the county has a hard time protecting them when a developer says, okay, I'm just going to close this trail off, blah, blah, blah. And so asking if there are, unofficial trails that are important to people, I think would maybe prompt trail mix into considering revision of the county trails plan to include them, or amending the county trails plan that's existing now to include them, which would mean a lot to a lot of Spanish Valley residents. Not that this would be a trail planning tool, but at least it would give an indication that, hey, yeah, there's some really important features out there that residents would like to see protected.
So that's a vote for number 12. And I think it's a good vote. It's one of those things, again, where we don't often survey.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
all right.
I'm
Well,
going to
Bob,
turn it
thank
over
you.
to you. I think I'll find the button that allows me to get rid of my sharing screen right there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this. This is so helpful. I think what we'll do is on our next meeting, we'll pick up the second half. If you have comments or thoughts in the meantime, share them, and then we'll update that draft when we share in our next packet. And then Bob, maybe once we go through it all, or if we have time beforehand, I might be able to help you even start to format that into a draft survey. So we can start to look at the formatting of some of these questions. And if somebody else wants to kick in and pitch in, we can talk about that in the future.
And what I'll do, Emily, is I'll actually take the second half of this survey, change it as best I can in terms of what I've heard about the first half. So we have something that, might be cleaner. Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. This is really, really helpful. Even just to kind of lay these questions out and see what's missing right now is really useful. Okay, so it's 4:57. We already voted to amend our agenda. I think we do that once more since the county attorney just joined. We do need a motion for it. So I'm going to call for citizens to be heard. And then if somebody wants to amend to pull the public hearing back up into the standard flow, Abby? Yes.
Oh, I do have Michael Scarda is in the chat indicated he is a citizen to be heard about the PUD, not about the land use changes we're about to discuss. So let him give his comment first.
Perfect. Yep. We have two people who have said they want to speak for citizens to be heard. And Mallory, I think you have an eyesight of that. So what we'll do right now is do citizens to be heard. Then we'll do a motion if there's one to pull that public hearing back up, and then we'll continue where we left off. So looks like Mark Horowitz, did I see you first pop in?
Greetings one and all, but I've really been struggling to try and get into the meeting and pull this together, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm just opening up my comments on my little laptop. I'm swinging it with 3 different devices tonight to be sure that I'm heard. Thank you. I'm reading, so I guess I'm completely unprepared because I just simply can't even get my, oh, there it is. Okay, forgive me, please forgive me. Please forgive me. A draft questionnaire for county residents regarding Spanish Valley is being discussed. Oh, these are my questions. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared. Forgive me.
Okay.
Perhaps I can come back at 6 o'clock.
There's somebody else who wants to make a comment. If you find you want to come back in after he comments, Mark, you're welcome to. Michael Scarda?
Yeah, thank you for your time. Concerning the PUD, anyway, I think it should be noted that the county council has full authorization to veto anything there for any reason that they want. So there can be a lot of adjustments. And I know some people are upset that some of them were passed in the past, and maybe they're valid concerns. They seem to be, but the council made the choice to pass those. Anyway, the law can be revamped quite a bit, but the PUD is not a use by right. And I think that if you do too much to restrict what it allows, then you hurt the housing problem in Grand County. Anyway, there's a reason that not a lot of development is done in Grand County, and part of that is that it's really difficult and there are a lot of restrictions. And if you want to help lower the prices, one of the ways to do that is to be open and free and encourage housing where possible. Not in every way, of course, but the county council, the county commission has every option to go ahead and say no and thumbs down anything in the PUD for any reason. So, and then just concerning the UTV, I would say that I don't ride them, but if we go ahead and make exceptions for electric vehicles, they shouldn't be included in this because they're fixing the problem instead of causing the problem. And so if you ban them, then you're hurting things from getting better. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mark, did you want to?
Well, I did. I am able, but it doesn't seem right to comment on the this questionnaire for Spanish Valley at this time. Perhaps it would be better if I wait until 6 o'clock. I think you will still be in session, although I don't see a 6 o'clock citizens to be heard on the agenda tonight.
We do 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock here.
May I speak then to just the citizens to be heard issue?
Yes, please. This is citizens to be heard. You're very welcome to speak.
Thank you very much. I've timed this to take me just a little over 3 minutes, okay? My name is Mark Horowitz. Let's see, let me make myself clear. I own Ancient Acres with a bed and breakfast permit. I have these comments and suggestions regarding your proposed survey about Spanish Valley. First, your discussion was thoughtful and considered. Thank you very much. And I know there's more time to comment, and believe me, I'll use it. I suggest a question of that you follow your question, are you a resident of Spanish Valley, should be followed with, do you own property in Spanish Valley? And for how long have you lived in Spanish Valley? I would like to hear responses to questions about OSTA, like how often do you attend events at OSTA, and would you prefer that OSTA serve the broader community? But most importantly for me, questions 16 and 21 are so packed with bias and baggage that I have to address them in detail. Question 21 is particularly offensive because it continues to confuse bed and breakfast with the proliferation of unsupervised overnight rentals, which stains the reputation of the Grand County's most responsible hosts, the bed and breakfast community. To illustrate the confusion, I attach ex parte communication, and I sent these to you, between myself and Mr. Willis following the October 26, 2020 meeting. See that thread below where he states, right, I didn't know and didn't care that there are various license types, or if there is a distinction made, unquote. In reality, there's a very clear distinction between the two permits, bed and breakfast and overnight rentals. Bed and breakfast, what I call home hosts, are a home for locals with extra rooms. Unsupervised overnight rentals subtract from the housing market and are a source of virtually all the complaints about parking and noise. Let me skip ahead here for time's sake. I'll make these issues later. Questions about bed and breakfast and overnight rentals should be separated. Question 16 should follow question 21 after separating the two permits. One question might read, are there unsupervised overnight rentals in your neighborhood? Or do overnight rentals affect your neighborhood? How do they? Separately, are there bed and breakfasts in your neighborhood? Do B&Bs affect your neighborhood, and how? Question might be, do you know what regulations, if any, apply to overnight rentals or B&Bs? In fact, if planning and P&Z commissioners don't know, why would you imagine residents would? And with 3 new P&Z members and 3 new county commission members, it seems like we are starting all over again with a whole new set of confused biases about bed and breakfast. I implore P&Z members, new P&Z members, to watch the P&Z meeting of October 26th, link provided in the email I sent. I encourage you each to compare the recorded meeting with the minutes subsequently approved. Attached below are my notes on that meeting. I'm sending that to you. I've sent that to you. Lastly, the suggestion that, quote, stronger penalties, unquote, apply to, quote, those who violate their permits makes me cringe, because this validates my concern that our current non-conforming status is, as was stated at the October meeting, a way to make us, quote, go away. I would like to know from the chair who proposed these 2 questions. Last sentence, unlike unsupervised overnight rentals, permitted B&Bs in Grand County do not violate their permits or affect their neighborhoods. There has never been a complaint about my bed and breakfast that my 20 years of experience as a home host might be influenced by Spanish Valley residents' problems with unsupervised overnight rentals leaves me pale and faint. And with that, I say good luck to us all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody else who would like to speak during citizens to be heard who doesn't have a comment that has to do with our public hearing? Okay, seeing none, welcome to the county attorney. We did adjust our schedule to table this below the Grand County action items report because we didn't know when you join us. So if there is a motion to move this, untable this public hearing, I'll entertain that.
Also move.
Okay. So moved by Josie. Did I see seconded? Seconded by Makeda. All in favor? Great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Rick and Garish, you can put your votes in the chat. Yes. Great. 6-4. Rick abstaining. All right. Thank you, everybody. So I will welcome the county attorney. The order for this is we will begin with a report from the county attorney and from staff, as well as any questions for them. Then we will open the public hearing and invite anybody who would like to speak. Based off of the number of people who want to speak, we may limit time to speak. So if you would like to make a comment, I would appreciate it if you would please note in the chat that you are here to make a comment for this public hearing. Let's see here. Christina, are you leading this conversation or is Abby kicking us off?
Sure, I'll lead. Abby, chime in anytime you want. I think what makes the most sense is to talk about what has changed, and then open it up for public comment or questions, whatever you guys want to do. We did workshop this land use code update on the 8th. After that, we took this to a discussion with the county commission at a workshop before our last meeting. And so there are a few changes based on that. I have attempted to present what I think, what I heard, where there is consensus. So I have removed a couple of things where I didn't feel like there was consensus, either from our planning commission discussion previously or the county commission workshop, but that is somewhat subjective that we didn't have straw poll votes or anything. So if you don't see something here that you want to see, and you want to make a recommendation tonight, you can insert things in. So the two main ones are the fleet inventory regulation, whether that's a max or anything else you want to see. We just talked about it generally last time, and there were some negative comments about that at the planning commission level and the county commission level. So I went ahead and removed it. And the other one is a maximum number of ATVs that could travel in a caravan. One reason I removed that is that, so we have 5 ATV companies in the county. And I was hoping to find time to talk with one, because we might have one that does do rentals aside from tours, but I'm not clear on that right now. But 4 of the 5 for sure are guiding companies. They do not rent ATVs outside of their tours. And under their special permit with the BLM, they do have to have 1 guide for every 5 ATVs that are drive ATVs, right, by a customer. But they don't have a limit on the number that can travel together. So you could have 12 ATVs traveling together under BLM special permit as long as you have 2 guides in that group. And then again, I just didn't find consensus, but that's something you could add back in. One of the main changes, and let me just say, backing up, that this land use code update is going to work in conjunction with the Title V update. Title V is from our general ordinances, and that's where you see business regulations. The land use code mostly now, and this is a little bit of a change in structure, but the terms are very similar to what we looked at before. The land use code integrates Title V. Instead of repeating this regulation, you're only going to see it in the one place. A big change is asking our general outfitters, not just ATV guide services, but general outfitters and guides, if they are using ATVs in their businesses, to also comply with these same regulations. And that is something that came out of the county's noise workshop, and a couple of businesses came out of the woodwork and said, well, we are not renting ATVs, but we are using them in our permitted licensed business. One of those was a hunting outfitter, for example. And that use is permissible as long as they're not renting the ATVs, but they should be required to also comply with the same noise regulations, the same identification, ATV identification regulations, et cetera. In my opinion, there's been no discussion at the county commission level or the planning commission level on this item. So I'm very interested to hear from you. And this is in this new section. It's the 3.2.3 K1. Those are those new regulations. 2 is integrating Title V, and do we have Title V in the packet? We do. Okay, so Those regulations haven't changed substantially since our discussion, but I will go through a few of those. So now we're integrating those. 2C is new, which is just distinguishing an ATV rental or outfitting company from ATV sales. So an ATV outfitter guide service and rental business may sell ATVs, used ATVs as part of their fleet maintenance. This next one, 3.2.3 T, is also something we don't, we didn't have a lot of time to have a discussion on ATV sales, but the consensus that I heard anyway at the county commission level was that that ATVs, you know, the commission didn't have an issue with allowing ATV sales in the same zones that ATV rental companies would be permitted in, but they were interested in considering whether those ATVs sold should be all electric models or all quiet models. So T1A, that's language that we need to work on, and I would like to hear from you. We could leave it as is, but you know, I think we could also be more clear. The first section about electric models doesn't even need to be there if your only concern is just meeting the sound pressure levels. Those are the big changes. I do think you'll see in the definition section, we've added a few definitions that just needed cleaning up that have nothing to do with ATV, but since we had already noticed changes to 10.2, we added those in. That's clustering development pattern. That's a concern that's come out of the Creekside PUD issues. Overnight accommodations and short-term accommodations are not actually defined except in section 6.15, and the way they're defined there applies only to section 6.15. So that's something that's important to clean up. Title 5, the section here that is applicable to the land use code update, so I just want to focus on that for today, but if y'all have other questions, we certainly can go through it, is 5.02. So if you'll turn to that section, which is on page 23 of the packet. So this still requires the fleet inventory, which we've already been requiring, but it does add some clarification that, you know, we've had some of our ATV companies tried to say, I don't have to provide this fleet inventory because I'm selling a guide service. I am not renting an ATV, but they're renting the ATV as part of the guide service. So we did clean that up. We're, you know, just added the type of vehicle. So not much change there. 5.02.020 is where you see the meat of what these ATV business regulations look like. A is our permit cap. And so we do have those 5 business licenses that would, this is a limit for ATV outfitter guide service and rental businesses, which is defined above. So this would not include, say, your general hunting businesses. We're not limiting those. We're just requiring that any of these general outfitters or guides who use ATVs in their business also comply. B is ATV identification. I haven't had a chance to update this, but Andrea Brand, who's the director of the Sand Flats Recreation Area, which is of course a co-managed special recreation area between the county and the BLM. She would like to see not just the magnet or the sticker on the ATV, but she'd also like to see what's called a whip flag that would be attached to the ATV, which would have a flag with the same information. We did consider requiring that, but the feedback I got from the Motorized Trail Committee and from the BLM was those can be hard to see based on conditions because of wind, and that the sticker or magnet made more sense, but Andrea disagrees, and she thinks it's really important, you know, in sand flats in particular, where you might have an ATV that's off-road, depending on the location of the ATV, and they're off-road violating rules. They're driving by a sign that says, you know, stay on the trail, but based on the topography, based on where their location is relative to a fin, you can't necessarily see the side of the ATV, but you'd be able to see a whip flag pointing up. So Andrea Brand, FYI, would like us to add to subsection B here, also a whip flag. So they'd be required to have identification on the car and a whip flag. The 50-foot language is new. That I got from the BLM. That is what their special permit regulations require, so that the sign is legible from 50 feet. They're very supportive of this ATV identification item. Even though they require it as part of their special permit, they have found that it has been hard for them to bring these ATV companies into compliance. And so they like that the county is a co-partner in requiring this identification. They think that will bring these the businesses into 100% compliance. Subsection C is, for a lot of people, the most important, which is about the noise. Okay, this has changed a little bit. Last time we talked, if you'll remember, we were talking about the stationary test. So there's two main ways to measure ATV noise. And one is a stationary test. This is an equipment test, and it's measured 20 inches off the tailpipe. And you're gonna see higher dBAs, right? Because it's 20 inches off the tailpipe. A distance test is a manner of operation test. It's a total vehicle test, and it is a measurement from afar. So when I get so many questions about people who are reading different ordinances and they think like, oh, these guys are requiring this really low dBA number, well, make sure to check the test because the test really matters. We decided, because the operational test, the distance test, is really more important for solving Moab's noise issues because it considers the drivetrain noise, the tire noise, the speed, whether or not the driver is revving the engine, et cetera. It considers a lot more than just the equipment, just the emission system, that we wanted to focus. If we are going to require a different dBA level, a different maximum noise pressure for businesses, we wanted to make sure it was the distance test. However, this 80 dBA at 25 feet is the distance test that we are so far requiring, at least in our draft noise ordinance right now. And so the draft noise ordinance says 92 dBA at 20 inches or 80 dBA at 25 feet. The 80 dBA at 25 feet, why these two tests don't really correlate with each other. And we should have a type 1 noise meter at the county by the end of the week. We've so far done our noise measurements with the type 3, which is not law enforcement grade, and it's not reliable. So we're going to play with these numbers, but we do still believe this to be, you know, a number that could make a difference, and yet that ATVs can comply with, both through installation of silencing mufflers, but also manner of operation. And we're starting to get a lot of good feedback that the speed limits are working and that the speed limit alone is really dropping the noise. And so again, this will allow ATVs to come into compliance by the way they drive. We have left in the trailering requirement, and I do want to hear from you guys on that, because I know that there was some discussion whether we want to do that. And the commission was pretty strong, in my opinion, that they didn't like the 3-year amortization. They felt like that was too long for a business to come into compliance based on the relative cost to comply, the relative cost to the business of what the county was requiring versus the market for ATV rentals. And so the direction I got from the commission, in my opinion, was to reduce that. And so I'm now proposing that each ATV business comes into compliance by end of January of next year. But again, that's something we could change as well, and might change before the commission, regardless of what happens here. I think D&E were in there before. These are just general. Oh no, they weren't, because, okay, well, D is just a general, you got to comply. And then E, this came up at the Motorized Trail Committee meeting, which I did after our last discussion. And the Motorized Trail Committee really wanted to hear from, well, how are we going to enforce violations against an owner of a business versus a customer of a business? So my proposal is that we treat a violation by the owner or agent of an ATV business strictly, and one violation alone would constitute grounds for revocation. That doesn't mean, based on all facts, that we would revoke the business license, but we could. Whereas you would need 3 or more violations by a client in any calendar year. That's a proposal up for discussion. Chapter 5.03 is new. And this is your chair did bring this up at the last meeting, and we also had further discussions. And so I'm basing this on recommendations and ideas from Emily. And the purpose here is to try to transfer the burden of education and compliance onto our overnight accommodations, where a lot of these private, especially the private ATV visitors are staying. And of course, you know, most of the people who are renting either machines or tours from our local businesses. And so this would require that all overnight accommodations post an 8x11 or larger sign in a conspicuous location near each primary ingress and egress, which summarizes our noise pollution ordinance and states that the ordinance will be strictly enforced. We would create that form, just like we did with the mask mandate. We created the form, then it was up to the business to post it. This requires expressly that each overnight accommodation complies with county law, and including this Title 11, or our Title 11, which is separate. And then the proposal here is a similar enforcement mechanism where 3 or more violations by a customer of an overnight accommodation in any calendar year shall constitute grounds for revocation. And I think those are the big changes. So I'm going to leave it there. Abby, do you have anything to contribute?
No, you've covered everything. But...
Right. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions for staff about this. And what we tend to do with our public hearings is withhold statements about the veracity of the item itself until we are in discussion. So if there are clarification questions, not adjustments, but clarifications to staff or to the county attorney, make those now. Otherwise, we'll open the public hearing and then continue with discussion. Garish, I see you.
Okay. My question is, I think the 80 dBH at 25 feet is a good step in the right direction. But doesn't it have to have a speed? Or is it just anytime any vehicle is above that limit, no matter what the speed is, there's a violation? Or is this a way of getting compliance? Do you get a sticker if you've tested your ATV or the ATV's been tested and it's in compliance at 80 dBH at 25 feet? Is it at 5 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I haven't finished doing this in our main noise ordinance, and I would integrate a reference in that section to these procedures when I'm done with them. Ogden City, though, does have, for example, some procedures I'll probably be basing ours off of that tells us how we do this test. Here's the tricky thing, and it's not something that I completely understand at this point, I'll admit. And I should also update you guys that we have officially hired a noise expert. His name is Les Blomberg. He's been doing this 25 years. He's not an ATV noise expert, but he is a motor vehicle noise expert. He's with a group called the Noise Pollution Clearinghouse. Our budget for him is very small until we discuss it in more detail at the county commission, but I still think he'll be able to really help us hone some of these. So here's the issue with that test in general. You have to isolate one vehicle. So like roadside, we can only do it in an intersection, pretty much is going to be the only efficient way that we could do noise enforcement with that distance test. But here, it's a really good point. Like here, you know, these businesses will be hiring the sheriff's office to certify their compliance. And we do need to figure out, you know, all those parameters, including speed. I don't have that answer for you today, unfortunately.
Are there any other clarifying questions for staff or the county attorney? Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing. I don't see anybody who has posted in chat that they would like to speak, but if you would like to speak and you're here for the public hearing, please. Okay, I see one. So Reed Pendleton, you're welcome to come off of mute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So obviously this is a complex issue. Lots of passion on both sides. I wish there was more time to actually thoroughly go through this. I feel like it's being rushed a little bit because of a deadline. But I'll try and make a few comments. I'm kind of scattered all around right now, but the first comment I have is on the ATV sales, 1.A, T1A, which Christina mentioned, in regards to restricting the sales of ATVs in town to electric models or ones that are in compliance. I would agree with Commissioner Walker. He mentioned that he deemed this as overreach by the county, and that the main reasoning for all these regulations was to more dictate the noise on our streets rather than who could sell, a certain item at a dealership. We don't even have any dealerships right now, but most of the people that, if there was a dealership that got set up, they're going to sell to people that probably don't live in the county. So I kind of look at it like, if somebody was going to start a grocery store and the county says you could only sell gluten-free food, I feel like it's very restrictive for no real reason. So that was one comment. Second comment would be the overnight accommodation section 5.03.010 that was just gone over. We are the front lines for a lot of information for the county and regulations, and we're very adamant about people being street legal before they leave our campground. And so, compliance with A and B, I don't really think is much of an issue. The enforcement I have a major issue with. I host 10,000 people a year at my campground. And so for 3 violations in a year, after somebody has left my premise and gone to a business in town and rented a UTV of which I have no knowledge of, and then getting a violation and then me being reprimanded for it, I feel like is it's not right. I have no control when somebody goes and does an activity off of my property. I regulate people riding them on my property, and if they're allowed, I tell them to stop it. If they're reckless, I tell them to stop it. We have a trailer business on our site, and so we actually provide trailers or rent trailers to people so they can access trails. We're very active as far as that, education-wise. But to just say that an overnight accommodation will lose its permit because 3 reckless people in 1 year get a citation, I believe that is ridiculous. Next comment. So the next comment I have is in regards to the resort special area north of town. This was brought up in the workshop as well. So the main reason for all these regulations, if we're honest, is just to regulate noise within the city streets of Moab and where the locals live. And I feel like the area north of town is a completely different area than what, these regulations are trying to regulate. And so there's very few residences up in that north area corridor. So there's hardly anybody that would be affected. Most of the properties already have direct access to trails up there. And so people are literally driving from the private properties onto trail systems. And so it's not like they have to drive through neighborhoods for access. Most people who would want to ride Cane Creek and Sand Flats and the other trails in town are going to trailer those ATVs just because it's 10 miles or more from the north area. And so trailering, again, satisfies the noise ordinance or the regulation. It's not providing noise on our streets. And then, at the same time, most of the people that rent them here in town trailer them to the north. So, it fits kind of hand in hand. It's kind of a separate area. And then, ATVs are already a major common use for those properties north of town. So it does already fit into the type of activities that are going on up there. And I believe, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I believe in the workshop, Christina mentioned that the Motorized Trails Committee did mention that the north area could be an acceptable use for these types of businesses. So I would ask that the Planning Commission put that in as a conditional use for the north area corridor. I do believe it's a good fit for development in that area. Let's see if I got anything else. So the last comment, there's been a few businesses that have come to light after the workshop last week that may have one or two ATVs that they own. They operate a business that's completely different than an outfitter guide ATV rental, but they do have one or two machines that they've rented as a retail type service to patrons of their business. And at the workshop, it was asked that those people, come forward so that, they could be put into this discussion of caps. And my business is one of them. And I do have one street legal machine that I have rented occasionally. And there's nowhere that I can find in the land use code where up until these regulations where ATVs are actually designated as part of a land use code designation. And so I feel like businesses like myself, if we're willing to, which I am, willing to do what's necessary to make that street legal vehicle in compliance, that I should be able to continue the ability to rent that. I'm not a guide outfitter. I'm not, sending 15 people down the street every single day. It's a service I provide occasionally to people when they can't find one in town, when they're all rented out. So it's a very, very small part of my business, but it is part of my business. And I've done it the legal way. I've paid taxes on it. Every income that I made, I've reported. Like, I wasn't trying to get around not having a business license. I just didn't know that there was a specific type of business license required for that. And now that you guys are going to separate out ATVs as a business type, I think those businesses should have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm willing to come into compliance in order to continue. So that's all I've got for right now.
Had to unmute. Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment during this public hearing?
Hi, Planning Commission. My name's Liz, and I can't get on the Zoom, but I would like to comment.
Liz, can you give your full name and then you're welcome to speak?
Yes, sorry about that. I just wasn't sure if you could hear me. My name's Liz Thomas, and I have been following this noise issue for a long time, as all of you guys have. And I just want to say I'm excited, and I really support these proposed amendments that are in your packet. I know it's been a lot of work putting these together, and I think they'll go a long way in addressing our noise problem. And I think it's important to recognize that UTV rental businesses are really part of the problem. And so they should be part of the solution. And capping the number of rental businesses and probably also capping the fleet size seems like a way to start addressing a big portion of our UTV noise problems in the county and in the city. And I love the idea of the identifying stickers and maybe even the whip flags, if that helps folks identify them so there's better enforcement. I think that's great. One thing I would add, but I don't want to muddy the water because I know the DBA levels are very confusing and they're, all technical and scientific, but it seems like if operating a business in our county is a privilege, it's not a right. And I think that we could impose, quiet UTV limits on the rental machines so that they're not any louder than passenger cars. Because these vehicles end up being sold to clients kind of yearly. And those clients bring them back as private vehicles. And so it would be nice to have really quiet rental machines that, are probably going to come back to our community season after season. So I really would appreciate seeing some really quiet noise levels for the rental machines in town and in the county. And I think the county attorney just mentioned the phase in for rental businesses by the end of January 2020. And I think that's definitely doable. And maybe even, sooner by fall of 2021. But I think that phase in would be a reasonable thing to do. So I just wanted to voice my support for these draft amendments. I think they're great. And I think the community will be behind the Planning Commission and the County Commission when it comes time for them to be actually voted on. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
And Emily, sorry, I just want to make one more note for anyone who might be watching on YouTube right now. The link on the Agenda Center for the public hearing will bring you into this meeting. If you have had trouble joining the meeting, go to the Agenda Center and use the link that is in the public hearing announcement under Planning Commission, and you'll be able to give public comment that way. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that in mind, we will leave the public hearing open for a few more minutes. Is there anybody else who's on the call who would like to speak? To the county attorney, while we're waiting to see if anybody joins before we close the public hearing, was there anything any clarifications that you thought were necessary based off of any comments that were raised? Otherwise, we'll close the hearing and move into discussion.
Yeah, no, I do want to bring up a couple of things I forgot to mention, one of which is the use table, which I didn't talk about at all, but you'll see there is a question mark in the resort special zone. And then the proposal, and again, we didn't talk a lot about this either at the county commission level, is to allow all the ATV businesses in the two categories to be conditional use in general business, highway commercial, resort commercial, although that is highlighted as a discussion item, and then resort special is highlighted with a question mark. So that's for you guys to decide. And Reed is correct that the Motorized Trail Committee recommends, and they went as far not to just say they recommend, oh, here's my kitty, that they recommend these businesses be allowed in resort special, but they even recommended they be allowed in residential areas to disperse the ATV companies closer to trailheads. I would say that that is not a popular idea in terms of the residential areas. And you guys know a lot more about the resort special planning than you do, but I would like to hear from you in terms of whether you think these ATV businesses are a good fit. But I do want to challenge Reed's summary of the purpose. I think we can all agree the primary goal of the overall noise regulatory reform that we're embarking on is to quiet noise in residential areas in the county. However, we are a recreation-based economy, and that's based on all user groups. And this is one user group having a disproportionate impact on all users. And I think that the consensus I hear from the commission is that this is more than just about our residential areas. It's also quieting noise down Cane Creek. It's quieting noise on our public lands. It's quieting noise in sand flats. And so it's bigger than just the residential areas, although that's certainly the priority. But I would like you to hear you guys talk to that. I didn't include a purpose section in Title V. I don't think it's appropriate for the land use code, the way we've written those regulations. But I actually think that in hearing, this has been brought up just most recently to me about the purpose. And are we all in agreement about the purpose being twofold? And maybe we aren't. So I think that I am going to propose a purpose paragraph in Title V for the commission so we can get really clear on, are we all in agreement about what the purpose is here? And that can also help guide the commission and staff into the future. I don't think I need to go into what Reed talked about with the other businesses, but I just want to clarify that we do motor vehicle rentals has always been an item in the code. And so we have always licensed motor vehicle companies. It's not surprising that we're getting these companies coming out of the woodwork saying, wait, I've been renting ATVs. We can't distinguish. If you had the right, if you were licensed to do motor vehicle rentals previously, we're including you in our list because we didn't have a separate ATV rental company. We can't stop you now, but if you were licensed to do a different business, and we are getting businesses coming forward, if you're licensed to do retail sales, if you're licensed to do an RV park, that is not vehicle sales, rentals, and licensing, which is a different category. So that's a legal issue that Reed and I will have to work out, but that is just for you guys to know some more context.
Christina, just to make sure we understand what you are looking for coming out of this. So you mentioned some thoughts around purpose. I'm assuming you don't need exact language in order for us to make a motion of recommendation.
No, yeah, just getting enough discussion that I can represent a consensus would be great. And, you know, I see Trish is on here too. And Trish, if you disagree with my, you know, understanding of county commission discussion, certainly weigh in as well, because there's some subjectivity about what I'm presenting as a consensus.
All right, thank you. Our public hearing is still open. I noticed somebody else joined the meeting. If you're here to make a comment, if you could just speak in the chat. Justin Rosenthal, are you here to make a comment or just to listen?
Oh, he responded in the chat that he is just listening, not here to make a comment.
Perfect, thank you. So seeing no additional comments and having held this open after announcing on YouTube, we will close this public hearing. Now, just to remind the body, for new planning commissioners, we are welcome to ask questions of the county attorney, to make any sorts of recommended changes before a motion is on the table. But what we want to avoid is questions of, you know, I will or I won't vote for that. You know, I don't know that we've ever found a perfect science about when we make a motion for this particular body. But are there any questions or comments for staff or for the county attorney?
I have a question just about the private vehicles, because the last meeting we talked about, or you mentioned briefly, like whether or not this would apply to people's private vehicles or if we would be testing them. Is that a completely separate issue? Is that not something we're looking at right now? Or did I just misread the ordinance?
Yeah, this applies only to our ATV businesses and their fleets. And so private vehicles will be governed by our general noise ordinance. And that is still work in progress. But the next steps are that the land use code update, the Title V update, and our noise ordinance update will all go to public hearing on Monday. I want to be really clear that only the land use code updates that you guys are considering tonight, making a recommendation for or against, is required to go to public hearing under law. We are taking the noise ordinance to a public hearing just to have as much public process as possible, and, you know, to hear from the citizens if there are any other creative ideas that we've forgotten, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just about our ATV businesses.
Great, I assumed. Thank you, Christina, for clarifying.
And just to clarify on what you just said, Christina, so for the deadline in April, we just need to finalize chapter 3. Chapter 5 doesn't need to be finalized. Is that correct?
Since Title V is working in conjunction with our land use update and is actually now integrated specifically rather than repeating the regulations, they need to be passed at the same time. Okay. So I've let the commission know we'll go to public hearing on the 6th. They could suspend the rules and vote that night. Given how controversial this is, I don't expect that to happen, quite frankly, but they will have to set a special meeting regardless to meet the deadline of April 18th. We can't wait to the next meeting. So I don't know when that date will be set, but my guess is typically we will often sort of leave it open for one more week and vote the week after. But sometime between April 6th and April 18th, I would expect the commission to take a vote.
I do actually have one clarifying question. It's on page 20 of the packet, 5.01.040, I believe B, under non-conforming uses. Maybe just get some clarification over what would happen if a company needed to change their address for any reason. I'm not sure if that means that they like lose their permit or their business license under this use, or what? Maybe, so if you could clarify that, if my question makes sense.
Yes, and first, before I do, I'm going to link it to a different section where we do allow a business to transfer, an ATV business to transfer their license. Let me just find that. Because the point isn't to force these 5 ATV businesses out of work. Okay, here it is, 5.01.120, which is on page 22, transferability. So in general, our business licenses in the county, and this is the way it's always been, and this is very typical for any county or city, is that a business license is particular to the location. The reason is because a lot of the business licensing process is about making sure the location is suitable. And that's everything from a land use review to a building inspection, right? And so you can't transfer your license, and that's true of any license type. But we wanted to specify here in 120 subsection D that an ATV business may transfer its business license upon the following conditions. The ATV business is compliance with law and all conditions of the license. So there's not some other reason why we would terminate it. The ATV business terminates its existing license simultaneously with approval of the new one. The new applicant complies with requirements of this title, meaning all the application stuff, the fleet inventory, all that stuff, and the county approves it. So the point about the 040 you brought up was that, hey, you can't just move your location, not get a new license, and then 9 months later be like, oops, didn't know. Then yeah, we would abandon your license at that point. But there is a very clear process for allowing you to transfer it if you're an ATV business.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah.
I've got a couple questions, as well as some comments of things that I think we might consider as adjustments before making an motion. So related to sales, somebody may have alluded to this, and I was a little confused. That's what made me think about it. Many guide services in town do kind of yard sales towards the end of the season where they may sell off vehicles. I don't know if that's something that happens here or if we would require a permit for it, but would we be regulating potentially secondary sales or only primary sales as the primary use?
So one of the new regulations is in that 3.2.3K, which is where it talks about our ATV businesses. It specifically allows sales of used vehicles as part of fleet maintenance. So as you turn over vehicles to new models, you can sell your old ones, and that does not make you an ATV sales business. Quite frankly, we don't have that clarity with Jeep companies, and we really should, but we hadn't noticed those sections, so I couldn't add that clarity here. But no, we're not intending to fit people into a different business just because they're selling their old stuff.
Related to that, and also related to the clarification you made about the primary purpose of this, a lot of what the Planning Commission takes on is related to long-term planning and signaling community goals and community values, not just existing uses. And for example, in our Northern Corridor Gateway Plan, a lot of that was about saying who we are as a community. This is a gateway into our community. So the two things that have been raised there that sort of raise this to me. So the first is around the fact that we don't have any sales yet and whether or not that would make us more keen to restricting what types of sales. I personally think we should place a requirement on electric sales. We already know that that's the future of this industry. And it's a way for us to signal that we aren't anti-motorized recreation, but we are pro-resident, and that we would like to see this type of vehicle usage sell in our community in a way that reflects the usage that this community seeks to come together around. So unless, I was going to ask you, Christina, if you had a reason, and you don't need to detail it, but would you be able to think of reasons why we wouldn't want to make that for any reasons other than just recommendation preference towards the county commission?
No, and I had actually written it for the commission workshop as electric only. So the only way you would be able to do it is if you were selling electric. And I didn't get the sense the commission really liked that, although we also didn't talk about it at length. I will say that Rivian is an electric truck company, and they're very interested in establishing a base here. And I think that would be a great thing for us to be known for, is all these electric models. So I really like it personally, but I don't make the decisions.
You beat me to it. That was the exact example that I also saw. And I think that, we have an opportunity to show that mixed use doesn't have to mean, full impact use, and we can find creative ways to move forward. So To whomever makes the motion, that is one adjustment that I would be keen to see. I'm sorry, I do have a bit of a long list, so allow me to just kind of go through here. Similarly, for that same reason of Planning Commission making recommendations in part on long-term planning and not just on existing use, I do not think that conditional uses in the 313, 191 resort special area make sense for this use. We heard very, very loudly from the community in that process that that was not a use that they wanted to see, and that they wanted to signal, again, not just the development in place of that area, but also the community values and the community sort of representation be reflected in that area. And I think we can always add it later, but I don't think we should add it now. So another point for discussion. I'm going to go through my list and then we can have some conversation. Stickers, magnets, whip flags, absolutely whip flags make sense. I think it should be a sticker and not a magnet, unfortunately. And again, this comes down to bad actors ruining it for everybody else. We've seen examples of people not putting their license plates on or obscuring them when breaking the law. And I think a magnet is too easily removed. So wanted to call that out. So under enforcement, two questions on enforcement under section 5. The first is on 5.02020 E. Is there any reason that we would want to specify a guide acting in the capacity as a guide? Is that, I mean, I don't know how necessary that is, but that did seem like something we might just want to clarify to express the reason why. And again, in my opinion, and you know, this comes down to when you are renting your vehicles to people, you are a steward of our community on behalf of everybody else here. Similarly to how we hold people who have nightly rentals responsible for, you know, if somebody threw a major party and broke the law or hurt residential property, you know, we'd hold the homeowner accountable to that and expect them to police to their tenants. Well, I think it's very similar here. But I do think it's worth calling out a guide in their capacity. And I don't see why we couldn't do that as well to place a limit on the number of units in one group to say if a group has a guide present, then we not place the restriction. But if somebody is just renting it for use without a guide, that we do cap the number of vehicles in a caravan, again, with the purpose that we would expect the guide to be responsible stewards of our community on behalf of their guests. I didn't see under the 5.03010 enforcement. I didn't see, I mean, I don't think it matters that much. I just didn't know if it was missing or if I just missed it. What enforcement there was for compliance for the homeowner. So if they didn't post that sign, or if they, as a business operator, violated this law, their noise enforcement, if we would want to enforce that. And I do think we should use legal size letter, not letters, legal size paper, not letter size paper. And I'm sorry, I think that's it. That was a lot, but that was my list. So feel free to discuss my comments, anyone, if you don't think that's right, but otherwise I would recommend that those be a part of the motion, those changes.
Let me just weigh in on the two enforcement. I thought all the comments were very good. I do like clarifying in 020E that it would be an agent or guide acting in capacity for the ATV business. I think that's good clarification. The reason I didn't use that exact language for the overnight accommodations is that obviously you have guides who are actively working within for and at the time of an ATV business, you know, in this world. Whereas with overnight accommodations, you know, a hotel, a Rim Village homeowner, it seems really unlikely, quite frankly, that we would find a violation of that owner. I don't mind using the same language and making it parallel if that feels better. I just don't think that's going to lead us anywhere. That's why I eliminated it.
I don't think it's necessary. I just didn't know if I had missed that. I do wonder though, like the fact that under notification, we say that that's enforced, and then we don't, I don't believe, say, you know, if they don't post it, are they fined? Is there a certain number of times where they can be caught not posting it. So that was more the enforcement for that part that I didn't see reflected. I personally, I don't think we should be holding overnight accommodation owners accountable to whether somebody else, right? Because they're not there. Again, coming back to this principle of, if you are there renting the vehicle to somebody else, if you are a guide on the trail with somebody else, and you are not doing your job as a steward of the community, then the community, has reason to say that the privilege of operating this business might not be something that you take seriously. So I think that that's a slippery slope. I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't like to see the county go down, but I do think we should enforce the placement of the signs. And I like the fact that we are enforcing the guests, therefore reflecting the placement of the signs to be held accountable.
Okay, and I think my only one, I don't mind the legal size in subsection A, oh, the fines. So we did pass a new sections of our chapter 1, title 1, and our general noise ordinances is now this administrative fine process that we never had before. So before, if you're violating stuff like business regulations, certain zone violations, all we could do is criminally prosecute you, which is a higher bar and, and complicated in its own way. So Title 1 is going to control, but I will go back before the next meeting on the 6th and just get clarity on how that would work here. And if I feel like we need to insert any specific information, I'll do that.
I've got another question for you. Under 5.02020C, maximum sound pressure levels, if I'm questioning what the reason to allow trailering of ATVs that don't conform to the sound limit is. And did you or anyone else that you discussed it with bring up a time limit where up until a certain date, this would be acceptable to trailer louder vehicles, but after this date, all vehicles would need to be in conformance with the sound limitation?
No, Trish, weigh in if you remember differently. I don't remember a whole lot of discussion about this at the commission level. My memory is actually sharper with what we discussed with the planning commission, which was let them amortize or give them the trailer option, but not both. And since I reduced the amortization down to compliance by the end of January 2020, which I do feel like I got clear feedback from the commission on, I left the trailering in there. So I don't think that has been well vetted at this point. I will say it was interesting because the chamber also did a noise workshop for local businesses. And you heard from some of those local businesses, these were mostly city businesses, that, oh, hey, we trailer almost everything anyway, because it's actually extremely hard on an ATV to let them drive on the street. So you don't want these renters driving your ATVs on the street because there's so much wear and tear. So for example, Mark Moore with Ultimate UTV said, hey, we only allow people to go to Cane Creek and Sand Flats, and everything else we trailer, and we charge $39 a pop. And he has a fleet of trailers and that all works for him. Then we heard from Kent Green, who has the cowboy tour company right in town. Well, hey, I don't have the space or the money to buy a bunch of trailers, So there was some discussion on that at the chamber noise, but I don't remember a whole lot before the commission. Trish, do you have any feedback there?
Yeah, I don't. No, I don't.
So that's, give us guidance. Whether it changes here or not, and quite frankly, I think the DBA level is still a moving target. So, if y'all can give me information to take back to the commission, that's really helpful. But I also wouldn't worry about wrapping your heads around like what that DBA should be or any of that, because we have this noise expert now that's going to inform us, law enforcement's in the mix. The sheriff sent our ordinance to the Attorney General to review, the Attorney General's office. So there's a lot going into what that DBA number ends up being. But the trailering piece, I think, would be interesting to hear from you guys.
Well, like our chair said that she proposes to make an amendment, and I think I'm considering making an amendment to the trailing requirement to only allow that for a reasonable amount of time. And I don't know what that is, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, but trailering, I mean, though within the city of Moab and some residential areas within the county, there is quite a concern about noise of ATVs on the streets. But in the backcountry, where you can be miles away from an ATV trail and you hear the whine of these engines, it kind of diminishes the peace and solitude that people have. So there's one user group that's having a big impact on multiple other people. So I think whether we amend it now or just continue the discussion, I think there should be a sunset clause to when there could be a trailering exception to the rule.
Gary,
Well, my
it's not an
recommendation
amendment.
is to make that consistent with this compliance deadline that's already in there. So if you guys don't want trailering, then just focus on what you want the compliance deadline to be and motion to amend the trailering out is my recommendation.
So
I-
it's
I'd
not
agree.
amended
I
yet.
like the idea of
We don't,
trailering.
hold on, pause. We don't have a motion on the table. It's just discussion right now. So it's not, just so everybody is clear, we're just discussing what is currently in this draft. If somebody wants to make a motion, which I recommend we start moving towards, then that person can summarize what they're hearing. And if that is seconded, people can then recommend amendments. But just so we know, we are still in the discussion phase looking at this draft.
And I just want to say in the discussion phrase that I agree with Gary Shin actually was thinking of his idea. You were mentioning earlier, Christina, that BLM wanted flags so that they could enforce things because it actually affects residents in the backcountry when they're in the backcountry and trying to enjoy the backcountry. I did have a question. It's a little off topic, but there is some people have said that you're not allowed to use these UTV on 128 or 191 when they aren't, when 191 isn't in town, that there's some state regulation. Is that true or is that not true?
Can I, just to
Yes.
keep the conversation rolling, can we bring that up during future considerations? Because that was also on my mind to ask for clarification.
The reason I'm asking is it does have something to do with where you would have these rental places and where you can drive to.
Well, and unfortunately, Bob, I don't have the answer. I did get that question formally today, and I haven't had a chance to review it. I think that it's coming up because Laurie Simonson, the city attorney, brought up a nuanced component of ATVs on state highways in the noise ordinance with the chamber. It was not my understanding that the statute she was referring to disallows them, but I do need to look into it further. So I don't have an answer.
Good, thank you.
I have a comment on trailering that kind of goes into a couple of questions as well, because I have mixed feelings on trailering because I think it's connected to a lot of other moving pieces that I would want clarification on before really deciding about trailering. One is, so yes, trailering more noisy vehicles to the backcountry, but that is also connected to how strong the county noise ordinance is, just period, because if it is a pretty strong noise ordinance, then even those vehicles that are trailered are going to be capped, but not as capped as rentals potentially who are not trailered. So, I feel like that's a moving target. I personally would like to see fleet caps because I think quantity really matters with ATVs, and to leave that as something that is either just open-ended or something that we expect to be limited by things such as trailering. It just feels really nebulous. And I think a lot of sentiment in town is really cap it where it currently is. And if that's, about 67 ATVs for about 5 rentals companies, then maybe we really need to be having that kind of dozen cap, which many people would probably want it to be lower anyway. But I would kind of vote for caps on fleet sizes, because I think another argument for trailering is that it's a natural cap, right? If you're going to want a trailer, then you can only have as many ATVs as you can trailer. And then I think my other sort of question for discussion is how much lower than the 80 decibels we think we could go on the 25-foot test reasonably. Because, hearing feedback that if ATVs have the privilege of driving around neighborhoods like passenger cars, then they should really behave like passenger cars. And I kind of agree with that as well. I'm really aware that they're not really manufactured to be driving around on pavement. And this is definitely a use that's not even really by design. And so knowing that motor vehicles in like slower speed residential neighborhoods really tends to be between like 60 and 70 decibels. So how close to that 70 decibels could we reasonably get? And based on that, I do think trailering is still a kind of this or that. And I would be open to trailering also being an amortized sort of a thing if these other things are also kind of sussed out. So that's my comment and sort of questions for discussion.
Okay, let me, because there was a lot there. Let me take a few of those things and talk about them. One, how good and effective is the noise ordinance going to be? It's not going to be as low as we want. So assume that, because we're constrained by state law. So assume that we can lower noise more effectively with these regulations against our ATV businesses, because doing business in Grand County is a privilege, and we do have authority to regulate them differently. So keep that in mind. 2, on the fleet, Josie did recite our correct number. We have gotten all the inventories in, and we have 67 ATV units in the county. So of course there are more units in the city. The county started requiring our fleet inventory January of this year. So we're a little ahead of the city where they are with their inventories. They have not gotten official inventories back, or at least not all of them. I think I heard the city estimate 115 ATV units, and I've heard other people sort of in the business within the motorized trail committee say, no way, it's a lot higher than that. So I don't think we have any idea, quite frankly, how many city units there are at this point, ATV units in the city. Our largest ATV company has 26. So we have one company with 26, 2 with 13, 1 with 8, 1 with 7. So keeping that in mind. One thing that could be groovy, this is a tiny little thing, but one thing that could be groovy with the caps is that company then knows what their county ATV number is for the identification purposes, and it will never change. Whereas if our fleet inventory is changing and each business is changing every single year, there's some awkwardness with how we run those numbers. I think we just create a lot of space between all 5 companies, but it would be, the company would not, they would know their numbers every single year if we capped it. That is an advantage. Can we go lower than the 80? Can we get close to 70 dBA? I don't have the answer to that yet, and we're working fast and furious with our noise expert to answer it. What I think could be helpful from you guys, though, is, and when I said don't worry too much about that number, maybe the approach is you make a recommendation on where you want to see that dBA number, and we'll work hard to get there to the extent we can. But we are going to be somewhat limited. Of course, we have a state statute that says we can't prohibit ATVs, street legal ATVs on county roads. And that's our limitation. So we've got to make sure it's a dBA level where you can modify the machine and meet it. And that's not just an equipment modification, but it's a manner of use modification.
Okay, can we just quickly, I just want to summarize where we're sitting. And then what I'd like is to see if somebody has a motion to put on the table, because that'll just keep the rest of this discussion cleaner. We can continue to make amendments and adjust. So let me just read out where we're kind of sitting, make sure I'm not missing anything that people would like to have as part of this discussion, and then entertain a motion. Okay, under 3.1 in the use tables, I have stated that I would like to see this not be considered a conditional use in the resort special. 3.2.3 T1A to require vehicle sales to be electric. 5.02.020 in section A, there's some conversation around capping fleet size, whether countywide or per business. So I don't think we have, Josie, you threw out the number 12, but I didn't know if that was your specific thinking. Under B, I have suggested a sticker instead of a magnet, and that we do require a whip flag. Under E, clarifying that any enforcement be restricted to the guide acting in the capacity as a guide. 5.03.010 A, that the the signage be legal size. And I had asked about enforcement. I'm not super worried about it. And then I was just going backwards trying to figure out where this fits in. Garish has discussed and Josie has discussed a period by which we require compliance regardless of trailering. I just want to make sure I got that correct and just be able to reflect what you're thinking, and then a specific date in mind. Josie asked about bringing the 25-foot test lower than 80. It sounds like that's probably more of just a conversational item and suggestion or direction to county staff versus something we'd want to see, but correct me if I'm wrong. And I brought up, and I can't find it, the idea of capping caravan size unless there is a guide present. And I think it would be wise to cap the guide to guest ratio to something reasonable, but not super restrictive. Like Christina, you said 1 to 12, I think, which, if you rent your whole fleet, if we cap it at 12 and then you have one guide, that's, sort of the worst case scenario for you.
BLM regs are 1 guide to 5 U-Drive ATVs. So if we're going to specify that, I would make it consistent, because all the tour companies are guiding on BLM land. So it doesn't make sense to make them different.
And again, the intent there is less about trying to place additional restrictions on our rental shops, and more giving us justification to provide similar restrictions, again, with the intent of reducing impact and noise and increasing accountability and responsibility to our visitors who might not have a guide. So what am I missing from there? Did anybody not hear something they had put in the table that you would like to have noted in the discussion? And then let's talk about that amortization schedule for trailering, Josie and Garish, if that's something you're interested in.
Emily, did you include, there was mention at one point about discussing what other general outfitters that use ATVs how that should be treated as well? Or do you think that we've?
No, Christine, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts there.
Well, there is a proposal that general outfitters would comply with only 2 of these regulations, which are the maximum sound pressure levels and the ATV identification. The issue that Reed brought up about whether businesses who were renting ATVs without a county license, that's a different legal issue, and we're not going to address that here.
Quick question in the realms of, I guess, trailering and caravan size. Does anyone know, and well, now I see Christina's there. Maybe Christina, have you spoken with any of the local business owners about, what they might suggest or be ideal as far as caravan size would be? And I ask that because if we're going to say, if they've got like trailer and maybe they can drive some, looking at their numbers, say the trailer holds 4 vehicles and, you know, if they're beholden to BLM to have, let's say they have 10 guests renting and then 2 guides, you know, that's you know, 12 vehicles all up. And so maybe they can trailer 4 of them. Anyways, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but I just wonder, have we heard anything about ideal caravan numbers from owners?
I haven't heard from owners. The only real discussion I've been involved in was at the Motorized Trail Committee meeting, which was their monthly meeting. And there were some really informal comments like, yeah, it gets really obnoxious when there's 10 or more of them. That's a number that stuck in my head, but there hasn't been a whole lot. I did go out myself and just sat on the Moab Rim. I guess it's been about 10 days ago, and observed. I took videos. I did time, sort of noise impact time lapses where I, you know, because on the Moab Rim, you can hear them coming down King Creek, but you also can hear them coming on the Potash Road. And on average, one ATV would impact me, the air, for 14 minutes. And that was under an assumption they were going the speed limit. And, you know, that's pretty interesting. I also personally could not hear a difference between 1 ATV and up to 4. So I saw caravans myself of 1, 2, and 4, and I could not hear a substantial difference between 1 and 4. You guys might totally disagree with that. That's all the information I have on that for you.
Okay. Thanks.
If the BLM does 1 guide to 5,
1 to
suggesting
5.
any,
Yeah, 1 to 5. And my guess is that really that operates to have a higher guide to guest ratio, because if you have eight people, you know, 8 vehicles that want to go, you got to have 2 guides. So I think that's an absolute max, and I think you'll probably see a higher ratio. I do want to also clarify, by the way, that I should say what Reed brought up with the business permit cap. You guys could increase it. You could tell us we don't want the permit cap. You could tell us we want to investigate, and every single person who's ever rented an ATV should be allowed to do so now. So I should say that has not been something that I've heard anyone is interested in doing so far. But I should, you know, clarify on that the permit cap is up for discussion.
well, and there's nothing that says we can't revisit this. I mean, this is an opportunity to say as a community, where do we want to start, to see if there's a measured impact change, and then make decisions based off of what we learn within a period of time. So I think that's important just to remind ourselves and remind the public. Let's see here. Makeda, Rick, Steve, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to speak up beyond a couple comments. So I just want to make sure that there's nothing lacking in the conversation. Otherwise, I am going to request a motion on the table.
Everything, I mean, I really kind of agree with basically all we've spoken about. I would say I'm hearing like this amortization period being till the end of the year. I wonder if we don't just want to do a year from the time that this passes. I know that would probably be unpopular with, you know, especially what I heard with the commission workshop was how can we get something that's measurable and noticeable by our residents as soon as possible. A year period seems pretty, it seems like it's in the spirit of good compromise with you know, these companies that are going to, you know, incur these financial burdens. Just knowing, it sounds like owners think, you know, it'll be $500. There's kind of a fixed price per vehicle. Just to acknowledge, in other industries with COVID and supply chains across the board have been hugely disrupted. And so are there going to be delays for them? Are prices going to be more expensive than usual? So as the world starts to open up a little bit more here, giving them, you know, 4 more months or so might be in the spirit of good compromise. I just throwing that out there.
Well, and my recommendation on that, if you want to give them more time, is to extend it until January 31 of 2023. And that's based on workloads in the clerk's office. And so January is when they do business renewals, and that is what they do in January. If you said a year after adoption, then you're pushing into other priorities they have. They have budgeting, they got all sorts of stuff. So I really like, for their sake, to keep it January as a compliance.
Yeah, completely understandable.
Yeah, I might also add that it seems to make sense to go by season as well, which I mean is kind of a moving target, but I feel like is about mid-February now. So I almost feel like companies would want to be handling this in the winter rather than in mid-spring anyway.
Yeah, as would our sheriff's office when they're doing the compliance checks for sure. And I will say, I think it's a really good point about supply. I can't speak to supply, but my office has done more research in terms of the mufflers themselves, the modifications to make these machines more quiet. The prices don't look like they've gone up. You know, the average muffler is about $230, and then you need labor. But I think it's a good point Steve makes in terms of timing. Are they readily available because of COVID delay?
So this is what I have. Before we put a motion on the table, I've noted, let's see here, Josie and Garish you had spoken on that. Josie and Garish. So even if we want to get a motion just sort of painting broad strokes and then amend, I think it would be useful for us to get a motion on the table, just kind of setting a line. So is there anybody who would like to make a motion? Or is there anything missing first? Call it out. Otherwise, I'd like a motion on the table.
I think that maximum caravan size would be 6 then, with 5 vehicles plus the one that's in the guide, or is because the guide is driving separately. Is that right?
So I'm for no guide.
Okay.
So not
Gotcha.
having a maximum unguided, but requiring the ratio that the BLM holds to. And if there's no guide, maximum rental caravan of 5. Christina suggested maybe it could be lower or higher. So again, if there's, I don't know that there's a notable difference between 4 and 5. Maybe we start lower and then work our way up, if there's any concern.
Technically, the noise expert did tell me that there's a technical dBA factor that you apply for each vehicle in a caravan, and it was substantial. I personally am not sure I hear it. It's all just too loud. So, you know, that's, if you guys have personal experience with it, yeah, you might have a different number you would prefer.
I personally don't like, it's either 5 or 6. When it's 5 or 6, it just seems to be that kind of exponential increase. And I say that from all of last year, you know, building a house right in Mulberry Grove, right across from Rotary Park. And so they're, you know, going up to Sand Flats there. So, you know, it's like you could tell when it was Thursday or when it was Friday because the noise volume just increased exponentially. But yeah, 5 or 6 is what I recall.
5 or 6 is too many. So are you comfortable with 4 being the maximum? Okay.
So on the trailering, I'll just throw out January of 2023 as the same date as in 5.02.02.070B2. That's negotiable, but we need a date in there. So I'm just throwing that out as the date.
Am I reflecting this correctly? So require sound compliance by that date, regardless of choice to trailer.
Yep.
Okay. And is there sort of, again, for the sake of moving forward, general consensus on January 31st, 2023, instead of January 31st, 2022, as opposed to 1 year from adoption? Steve, that was your suggestion.
Sorry, I was reflecting on that number.
Sorry, this is 5. There's a lot. 502, where is it? Existing businesses which are licensed to sell, rent, or lease vehicles, including ATV businesses. Sorry, beginning January 1st, 2022, all ATV businesses and other vehicle sales, rental, or leasing facility businesses shall be required to blah, blah, blah. So this is page 21. No, Christina, I'm sorry. Tell me if I'm looking in the wrong place.
I would keep it at 2022 is my personal.
The compliance section is 5.02.020C, and it's the last sentence. that it sets forth the maximum sound pressure level, it gives the trailering option, and then it requires compliance by January 31, 2022
Thank
as
you.
written. That whole section is going to need to be rewritten if the trailering option, amortizes out as well, but that's doable. And then also just while I have the floor, you have the max caravan size, not sure where this goes. I'd put that under 020 and just say new section, max caravan size.
I'm trying to find exact locations as the conversation's going, but this at least hopefully captures the conversation so far. So whoever makes a motion can consider this when making their motion.
And just so you're aware, the way I'd rewrite the maximum sound pressure section level, yep, that part that Emily is moving around, is it would just remove all reference to trailering, because of course they can always trailer. So it's just going to set forth the maximum dBA, and then it's going to give them until whatever date y'all select. That's how that will end up if you like the concept of doing away with the trailer exception.
I'm not sure I like the getting rid of, I think in the interim, having the trailer exception is a good thing, because at least it would get a lot of the noise out of town. So could we
There's no
wrap it up?
exception when there's no requirement. So there's no requirement for compliance until the future. So there's no reason to call out the trailer now. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm
If
not.
you want to give them more time if they're trailering, then that's something different that at least I'm understanding we're talking about.
I think there's two things we're talking about. I think, so Steve was suggesting that the general ordinance be written to require businesses being in compliance by January 31st, 2023, or 1 year from adoption, but somewhere out past that 2022 date. And then this question of, do we want to enforce, so as written in the draft, it allows for this trailering exception. And do we want to give the same date or a longer date by which the trailer exception goes off the books? So give them an extra year. If you feel that you can't meet that, or you don't want to meet that, or you have a different opinion about where the future of this community is going, and you think that this even won't be an issue by 2023, I think that's what I was hearing from Garish, and Josie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in the ballpark. I'm still kind of the notion that the only reason to get rid of trailering is because these vehicles are at the decibel level of normal passenger vehicles, because otherwise trailering still is less noise in residential neighborhoods. So that's a little bit of a thing that I'm hung up on.
And just so you guys know, you can't make an ATV currently as quiet as passenger vehicles. So I don't want us to misunderstand that. So even Polaris on their website, and they do encourage that you modify your machine to be quiet. The lowest they promise is 88 dBA under the stationary test. That's similar to what a semi sounds like. So I don't, going lower than that is a prohibition of ATVs.
And I think this is, as we see what happens with the technology, we can revisit this to meet changes in technology, which would allow us, I think, to be more in line with the steps that might be more tolerable to some people at the state level who might see this and see a threat. So.
Well, I really haven't been watching what the city's doing with their ATV and noise ordinances. But perhaps they will include trailering as an option for a period of time before compliance with a lower decibel level is required. So maybe that would take care of most of the noise issue within the city limits. And if that's the case, it would probably also take care of a lot of the noise issue outside of the city limits.
I don't want to raise a new can of worms, but one thing that I did just want to bring up is this idea of the community zones. Christina, where did the city land on that with regards to the school? And do we want to make mention of that, even if we don't apply it, so that we set precedents in our code?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I had forgotten about that. I have talked with Joel, the city manager, and Laurie multiple times, the city attorney, since our last meeting, and they are just behind us. What I can tell you is that they've hired the same noise expert, Les Blomberg, and they are hiring him at a greater scope, which is to draft all of their proposed ordinances. So there are no drafts currently. I think that we will end up with very similar ordinances between the county and the city, but there are not drafts out there. I did pass along the school zone in particular is where I focused the city, and the city attorney liked that idea. I don't know where it's gone since then, so we'll just want to hover and make sure it stays in there. And in terms of community zones, you know, I like that idea. I think it's early now. That's the kind of thing maybe we could integrate into a Title V purpose section and then flesh it out into the future. So I could attempt to do that for the commission draft.
I'd like to see that. I don't think it's something worth like holding up for any deep conversation without specifics right now. But my thoughts around calling this sort of area a community zone versus just a school zone is allowing us as a community to say, this is an area that we think a lower decibel level or a lower speed or any number of other things reflects a higher community value. The most obvious being school zones, but popular trailheads in the county, areas that have a very, very low number of overnight rentals might be another. So, you know, anywhere that's not within an overlay zone could be one. But I think it allows us to signal that this isn't about restriction, this is about protection. And so that was my thinking. And I think putting it into the purpose that the county may adopt these zones for the purpose of protecting our residents, and that we do value resident safety and resident security.
I would add any location where like communication is really vital, because noise does have a impact on like human to human communication. So that's like hospital, EMS, you know, emergency services, things like that.
Cool. All right, I'm going to pull this back up again. I'd like us to get a motion on the table. We can continue to propose amendments. But if somebody is willing to make a motion, I'd like us to move forward with that.
I'll make a motion.
So Makeda, I think this is your first motion, maybe first big one. Yeah. Snaps. So this is what we have discussed so far. And since we have this up, you could choose to say a motion, you know, using the language of the motion in the packet with the changes as discussed, as detailed here. If you wanted to pick out specific pieces of this that you'd like to include in your motion, you may do that as well. It is your motion. It is your floor.
Okay, what was the first wording? Sorry.
So in the packet, you're fine. In the packet.
One more thing, Emily, I think we're missing is in 3.1, do you want the no conditional use and resort special to apply to ATV sales as well, or no?
Yes.
Okay, because those are two different business types now.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
So in page 13 of your packet, there's a recommended motion that starts, I move to favorably recommend. And it is, again, up to you, but you could read that first paragraph whole and then say with the following changes, and then say changes as written here, or with the following changes, and you can itemize the ones that you would like to make a motion around.
Okay, great. Let me get to that then. Sorry, guys.
You're fine.
He said
It's the
page.
fun part of the process. This is what we all wait for.
The other boards I'm on we don't like, the other boards that I'm on doesn't follow quite as strictly. So I am excited to learn this. Now I'm getting all pressured. Maybe somebody else should do it.
Here, tell you what, I'll copy and paste. This is what is in the packet as the recommended motion.
Great. Great. Wow. Thank you for just laying it right out for me.
You're welcome.
I move to favorably recommend the proposed amendments to Land Use Code Sections 3.1, 3.2.3, 3.4.9.h, and 10.2 in conjunction with the proposed updates to Title V of the Grand County Journal Ordinances, with the following changes as listed in Chairman Campbell's notes.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table made by Maketa and seconded by OB. Is there any discussion or any amendments to be offered?
Can we just clarify, assume that motion includes a trailer exception that extends one more year to 2023? Is that accurate?
Okay, so
Yes.
because we have been saying this, you're right, we were not clear. That was reflected from what I believe the conversation to be in my notes. So would anybody like to amend that date? Make an amendment to amend the motion? Motion to amend the motion.
I'd like to amend to keep that date, but to maybe keep it open, like maybe we'll revisit trailering at that point.
So Josie, you'll need to say, I move to amend the motion.
I move to amend the motion to extend the trailering exception to January 31st, 2023 with added discussion of possible continuation past that date.
So that is, we'll have to have a specific recommendation. Would you like to say, unless the following is met, and sort of govern it that way?
I mean, I'm trying to think, like, because what I'm hearing from a lot of community members is that they would rather fleets be trailered than drive through their streets if they're not as quiet as passenger vehicles. And if it is impossible for them to be as quiet as passenger vehicles, then I'm not sure that we want to get rid of the trailering exception. So I might actually just make an amendment. I propose an amendment to indefinitely keep the trailering exception as an alternative.
So that would allow for, instead of enforcing compliance, that vehicle rent, that these ATV guides and outfitters would be allowed to have vehicles louder than the standards set out in 502.020 if they choose to trailer to the trailhead. So it wouldn't require them to meet the regulations of that sound. It would allow them a back door to get them out into the backcountry, which is fine if that's what you're intending. I just want to make sure.
I feel really conflicted on this point because I think that there is I think there are pros and cons of both. So I do feel really conflicted about this. And I worry about getting rid of trailering and having that somehow work negatively in unexpected ways.
That this wouldn't say that they couldn't trailer their vehicles. It would only say they could trailer their vehicles if they didn't want to meet the sound requirements. So they could still meet the sound requirements and choose to trailer their vehicles for any number of reasons.
Sure, but the trailering as an alternative is an incentive to trailer, whereas otherwise there's not necessarily an incentive to trailer.
Why don't you ask for a second and then discussion on this? Because I think we're
okay.
too
So
deep.
Josie, would you restate your motion? Thank you, Christina. You're right. Josie, would you restate your motion?
I'm not sure how I want to change this, to be honest. You know what? I'll just leave it as is for now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm too ambivalent about it.
Okay. Are there any other amendments to be made? To be moved? Is there any other discussion? Going once? Okay. Well, with that, we'll call the question. So we have a motion on the table by Makeda, seconded OB, to favorably recommend the proposed amendments to Land Use Code Sections 3.1, 3.23, 3.49.h, and 10.2 in conjunction with the proposed updates to Title V, Business Licenses of the Grand County General Ordinances, subject to the following, or including the following revisions to the draft as laid out in this screen share, which is not to allow conditional use in resort special for ATV outfitter guide services, rentals, and ATV sales, to require that vehicle sales be restricted to electric ATVs, to add to revise section 5.02.020 to have, we didn't clarify this. So to have a fleet size of X per business, which 12 was the number that Josie threw out. So I recommend we just move forward with that unless somebody wants to amend. Sorry, we're getting kind of conflated with Robert's rules.
Yeah, sorry. I do think we're in discussion though. And just so everyone understands, we can't require, folks have vested rights to their fleet size now. So if you pick 12 as the max fleet size, well, 3 of our businesses are out of compliance. They would be locked into their numbers now, but just so you know.
I mean, as a matter of discussion, is it possible to cap the overall permitted vehicles in Grand County, but not necessarily have a cap per rental agency or guide agency?
My concern there is we are actually only requiring the inventory in January of every year, and it's impossible for us to enforce it on an ongoing basis. So I don't think that works enforcement wise. I think it needs to be per company. That could be stated as the current fleet numbers. That could be a percentage increase from the current numbers as a cap. Or you could state, current numbers certain. We can pick a number that's lower. I just want to make sure you guys understand the 3 businesses with more than 12 vehicles they have the vested right to their current number, even though it exceeds that amount.
Would that just push them into a non-conforming use?
Well, they are licensed, so I think it would be a condition, since it's a conditional use permit, it would be a condition of their permit, so it no.
So
It would have to be noted in some way on their permit, but.
For the sake of Robert's rules, since this motion on the table doesn't have a specified number here, I would like a motion to amend. Otherwise, we will just scratch this from the amendment. So there's nothing specified. So Josie, if 12 per business, or anybody, if 12 per business or some other number is what you'd like to send as a recommendation to the county commission to signal interest in this, even if it led to discussion by them, let's just have I move to amend the motion on the table to include blank.
I'll amend it to include 12 per business.
Okay, so there's a motion to amend the motion on the table to set a maximum fleet size of 12 per business, considering that any existing fleet sizes would be grandfathered in, but no expansion to be allowed. Is there a second? Seconded by Makeda. All right, so we'll vote on the amendments and then we'll vote on the motion. Are there any additional motions to amend?
I would also like to move to amend in section 5.02.020C that it shall not exceed the maximum sound pressure level of 80 or less dBA. I guess I just want to signal that 80 might not be our ideal destination as far as a number.
Would it be more effective to signal that with just subbing in a smaller number than can be worked up from?
Possibly.
I think that's legally unnecessary, that change, because we're talking about a maximum, and the way it's written says it shall not exceed that. So certainly you can always go below it.
Sure, but I mean, as far as the final number that the commission gets to as well, and that the county gets to, I'm not sure if we want to try for a smaller number. And I guess I'm veering back into discussion because, part of me is like, could we start with a number like 80 and then try to amortize towards a lower number, in 3 years or something like that?
Okay, yeah, let me give you one more bit of data.
Yeah.
The parks require for motor vehicles, because of course ATVs aren't allowed in parks, but for motor vehicles, the maximum sound pressure level is 60 dBA at 25 feet. Again, ATVs can't get there now. I don't know how long it would take ATVs to get there. That's the only other vehicle dBA and that is at a distance. I actually think that's at 50 feet, so that's different also.
Right.
But I don't have anything in between those two. I did research and I tried to come up with some different numbers for you, and I couldn't find any.
Yeah, I was looking at a lot of them too, and it gets really pretty muddied by location. And I do agree that 80, is on the lower end of what I've seen. I'm just still very aware that that is still much louder than a passing vehicle.
Christina, if we were to say, or if Josie was to say, or whoever's motioning for this to say 75 dBA, is that veering into prohibition territory like you were saying earlier? Or is that something that would be a reasonable signal that maybe we understand we're not going to get that, but that's a good, like what she's saying of using that as a signal for the commission that.
I don't know. I just don't have that information. I don't have any heartburn either, though, about you guys recommending a low number and then us finding out before we get to the commission meeting whether we can meet it.
Yeah, because I'm also really interested to see what Les has to say and to kind of defer to expertise on this one. So I might.
Like he likes this number generally, but I will say it's for our general noise ordinances, my conversations with him mostly. And he did recommend that we just get our type 1 noise meter, which we will have at the end of this week. And Chris Baird and I plan to go out and do all sorts of measurements. We're actually going to retest, hopefully, all the ATVs that we tested before, because we were using a type 3 sound measure, which has a inaccuracy of 3 dBA, whereas the type 1 is, accurate within 1 dBA. And we want to test some more vehicles. We want to do the moving tests, the distance tests, and we're also going to use it for code levels too, because Les doesn't like, we have pretty high general noise levels for code violations, and Les doesn't like how we've done it. So he says, look, bring the level down to be protective and then create exemptions to create flexibility for your community. Since you're so rural, we get it. You're going to have a lot of exceptions. But so we just need to go out and play. And he does really recommend just go play and figure out what works for your community. Knowing that we have some constraints in state law.
So Josie, one of the ways that we've dealt with this in the past is rather than as a recommending body, this will be changed most likely by county commission. But what we can do is include in an original motion or an amended motion to include a specific directive to county staff, such as to revise 5.02.020C to the lowest possible number feasible before the county commission meeting. And you can direct staff in that way and then leave up to staff to have the discretion to make the decision they feel is best given that direction.
Yeah, so I would amend to, I would amend section 5.02.020C as stating that ATV shall not exceed the maximum sound pressure level at the minimum possible determined by the county, but not to exceed 80 decibels.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Minimum possible as determined by county staff, but not to exceed 80 dB. Josie OB. Okay. Are there any additional motions to amend? Christina, do you see anything missing in here to resolve during discussion before we go back to the motions to amend and then the original motion?
No, assuming the original motion has the trailer exception to January 31, 2023, I'm still a little confused on.
Let's capture that. So that was my motion. So I move to amend the original motion to set the date by which the trailer exception ends of January 31st, 2023, giving one additional year to reach compliance for those outfitters who choose to trailer to the trailhead.
That was my intent.
Okay, would you like to second my motion?
Second.
Seconded by Obi. Okay. Garish, you can amend to amend. Are there any additional motions to amend?
Yeah, I don't think I was amending. I was clarifying what my amendment its intention was.
Cool. Okay. Anything else I'm missing? Okay, then we will go through. We have 3 motions to amend. We'll vote on each of those, and then we will vote on the original motion. So, motion to amend 1, motion by Josie, seconded by Maketa, to limit the fleet size to 12 per business, grandfathering in existing fleet sizes as to be noted on their business permits. So all in favor of this amendment to the original motion, which would add this language, say aye or raise your hand. And I have to get my grid out. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. That's everyone. If there are votes that are split, would you call people by name so I can make sure to get that in the minutes?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. So that was a motion by Josie, seconded by Maketa, and it was unanimously voted in favor of amendment. Okay, our second motion to amend is to add the language in our recommendation of section 502020 against the 80 decibel limit at 25 feet, that staff replace that to be the lowest possible minimum as determined by county staff before the county commission meeting, but not to exceed 80 decibels. This was a motion by Josie and seconded by OB. All in favor of this amendment, raise your hand or say aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor, 7 in favor. So that is unanimous in favor as well. Okay, and our third, excuse me, I just deleted the wrong one. Our third motion to amend is to add a extended date for the trailer exception of January 31st, 2023, extending the period of compliance by 1 year for outfitters who need it and who choose to trailer through the trailheads. Made by Emily, seconded by OB. All in favor of this amendment to the original motion, raise your hand and say aye. Steve, Emily, Josie, OB, Rick, Garish, Maketa. That is also universal. Okay.
I have a correction though. I made proposed the amendment and OB seconded it.
So it was, okay. I think that got lost in discussion. Because that happened before the original motion and it wasn't clarified, Garish, I'm going to just recommend in the minutes we keep it as is, just good cleanliness, but dual power. Okay, awesome. Sorry, I'm trying to keep everything clean. Are there any, we are still in discussion. I have not called the final question yet. Are there any last amendments before we move on to the motion as amended? All right. Abby, Christina, I'm going to do my best not to butcher this as I restate the question, and then we will call the vote. So the motion on the table as amended is to move a favorable recommendation to the proposed amendments to land use code sections 3.1, 3.23, 3.49H, and 10.2 in conjunction with the proposed updates to Title V of the Grand County General Ordinances. Amended as followed. changes to the original draft to remove the conditional use in resort special for ATV outfitter guide services and rentals and for ATV sales, to require that any vehicle sales of ATVs be restricted to electric ATV sales, to set a max caravan size of 5 vehicles before requiring a guide, or for unguided rentals, a maximum of 4 vehicles in a caravan. Under that, it would be a new section under 5.02020. Under the existing sections of that section, subsections of that sections, limiting the fleet size to 12 per business while grandfathering in existing fleet sizes, requiring sticker identification and a whip flag in section B, amending the language in the draft requiring 80 decibels at 25 feet to be changed to the lowest possible decibel level the county staff is comfortable with before the county commission meeting without exceeding 80 decibels. Updating the date that compliance is required under that section to January 31st, 2022, while providing for an extended trailer exception to January 31st, 2023, after which all outfitters must be in compliance. And to clarify the enforcement section in subsection E, that this is only enforceable when the guide is acting in their capacity as a guide. And finally, changing the draft language in 5.03010 to require legal sized posters instead of letter size posters. That is the motion that is on the table, and I will call the question. All in favor of this motion as amended, raise your hand or say aye. Steve, Emily, Josie, OB, Rick, Garish, Makeda. That is unanimous. Christina, thank you so much for your patience with us as we tried to worm our way through this. I know this is a very complex subject, and we appreciate your leadership and guidance throughout it.
Well done. Glad we came out with a clear recommendation. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys are done here soon, but I'm out of here.
Have a great evening. We are nearly done.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So this moves us on to our county commission update. Tricia.
Okay, I'm going to take about 30 seconds, maybe 1 minute. Let's see. So a couple of the things that you asked for and or had an interest in was the Thompson Springs cleanup. We asked for $7,500 from the county to assist us with that initial cleanup, which will happen mid-June, and that passed 7 to 0. So that was great. Yeah, it was really exciting. The commissioners did not support the feasibility studies concerning 191 bypass and repurpose that $30,000 that was allotted to that. The other transportation related studies that included ideas about pedestrian friendly spaces, and that passed 6 to 1. And I think that is about it. I know that the possible action items about the land use code section 6.5.3, 6.5.4, 6.5.5, the regarded permitted sign and illumination. Chrissy discussed that, the amendment to that sign ordinance. And then I think I know the hearing to solicit input, and that is open until March 24th.
All right. Thank you. Y'all are busy. Recent building permit review. My staff.
Let me know if anyone has questions on that. Otherwise, it's in the packet.
Awesome.
All right. And then for the future considerations, the medical marijuana zoning, that is something that we will hopefully be able to discuss in a little more detail at the next meeting. Because Utah allows medical marijuana, our zoning code needs to now include this business type in our use table. And so we've just barely started to discuss this with the county commission. And I think Emily was in on a little bit of that discussion as well, but just kind of figuring out the best way to incorporate this use into our use table, because now it is a use in the state of Utah. So we'll hopefully have more detail on that at the next meeting. And the Thompson replat and rezone is also kind of moving forward. It's Commissioner Hadeen and others have done a fantastic job in getting money for the cleanup and getting that project really, shaping up quickly. The cleanup of the parcels and the zones is a little bit of a slower process, but we're definitely still working ahead on that. And I'll keep you updated as we get a little deeper into that process.
And Abby, do you mind kind of to a water board meeting in Thompson last week also? And I think things are happening out there. So I think we just have to be, prepared for, I think all in all, they asked for 85 new water taps was on the agenda. And so the board was just kind of taken aback, and believe me, it was crazy. It was the Wild West for sure. That meeting went on for hours and hours and hours, and a lot of, just threats, and it was wild. So that community, I think the fact is, like, it's going to be an overspill for this valley, and so we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, we've definitely seen in our office a lot more interest in developing or subdividing or rezoning or, a bunch of different projects in Thompson. And so we might see some of those specific projects come before the Planning Commission, either during the time that we're also working on the replat and rezone, or even before we get to that. So, yeah. Any other future considerations?
One that did come up that I wanted to raise as well, but Bob touched on, is these questions around clarification of ATV legality in our areas of highway where the speed limit exceeds 55 miles per hour. And I meant to ask the county attorney about this just as a follow-up and forgot, but I actually called the sheriff this morning and asked for a call back, and I think they were just busy. But Abby, maybe, is that something we could recommend, or Tricia, maybe recommend asking the sheriff for clarification at the next county commission meeting? Because I know that's something of particular concern.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to raise, it's not so much about this body, but as we are looking at uses in Spanish Valley. So I am out in the southern part of the county, pretty close to the county line. And our telecommunication utilities are just maxed out. I actually spoke to somebody at Verizon who said they had never seen cell towers as congested as ours. And it was due to the fact that our infrastructure was built for the residents and not for all the visitors. And basically, even if you're paying out the, to try and, get ahead of all the congestion, it doesn't matter. He was like, you're better off not paying if you're just using your phone in your home, because you're never going to be able to get in front of this congestion. Given the fact that we're also lacking broadband service, means that there's very limited options for people who are telecommunicating, or by choice or by force at this point, who are living in the valley. And while it's not our county, San Juan County is essentially completely not served. And so they are actively looking for development for cell towers. And we know that this is something that's been controversial in the past in the county. So I just wanted to raise this, because this is one where, as we talk about economic diversification, particularly there's been some conversation about trying to attract satellite offices or workers from the Silicon Slopes, Salt Lake City area, or even, encouraging entrepreneurialism here. That is going to be a major limitation. And I know people in the city and the county are looking at it, but I think as a planning commission, especially in the southern parts of the county, it's something we should all be aware of. Not just woe is me for my internet, but I know that if I'm hurting from it, I'm not alone. So just wanted to raise that, so we're all aware of sort of that as an ongoing issue. It's been a fun one. Okay.
Where did we land with continuing the Spanish Valley survey?
So Bob led us through the first half. It sounds like at our next meeting, we're going to put time aside to go to the second half of the survey, but Bob is going to spend some time cleaning up or revising, maybe restructuring that based off of his discretion from the conversation today. And Bob is leading that effort. So I've asked him if he would just sort of take point on that sphere. We won't be actioning upon it until we have staff, but I think it's certainly something that we can get out to the public, up on the county planning, planning department's website, and start to get input as soon as we feel comfortable with that survey. And hopefully this will give us some time to start to get input from the community, and we can host town halls. I mean, there's nothing that stops this body from participating in citizen outreach. It's the crafting of any specific land use ordinance or changes to our land use code, proposed changes to our land use code. We'd want to have county staff in the department ready to go. So we're hoping that this can essentially let us meet them there once they join in. So, and Steve, if you'd like to contribute, I'm sure Bob would love to help. So
yeah, I was just going to say, certainly email me if you have any suggestions, because what I'd like to do is in 4 or 5 days, certainly go over that last set of questions, and I'll take any input now so it's easier when we discuss it together.
perfect.
Bob, thank you so much for working on that.
Okay. Anything else under future considerations? I was told we do need to go through the formal motion to amend. I was trying to get us out faster the last few times. So is there a motion to amend the meeting?
To adjourn.
Excuse me. Matt.
Thanks, Emily.
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Motion that we adjourn the meeting by Garish. Is there a second? Seconded by Maketa. It's like 4 people seconded at the same time. All in favor? It's unanimous. Garish, yes. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you